Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to an era where the concept of beauty wasn't just about looking good, but about surviving, literally. You're not just listening to a story, you're about to trudge through the muddy, often disease-ridden streets of the Middle Ages, where the very air hangs heavy with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and, well, let's just say a distinct lack of modern plumbing. You'll hear the distant clatter of a blacksmith's hammer, the faint bleating of sheep, and the murmur of voices, all under a sky that probably looks a lot grayer than you're used to. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of history to reveal a truth that's far less glamorous than any storybook. Medieval beauty standards were a brutal, often impossible, nightmare for the vast majority of ordinary people. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a week trying to meet them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling extra cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a cobbled path, or perhaps more accurately, a path of compacted mud and refuse. The year flickers somewhere between 1000 and 1500 AD, a vast expanse of time, but one united by common struggles and surprisingly persistent, often bizarre, ideals of what constituted beauty. Forget your curated Instagram feeds and your 10-step skincare routines. Here, simply existing is a full-time job. Your hands, if you're an ordinary person, are probably calloused from labor, your skin weathered by sun and wind, and your teeth, well, let's not even go there just yet. The idea of achieving the era's celebrated aesthetic is, for most, as fantastical as dragons soaring overhead. Imagine, if you will, the vision of medieval perfection. A woman with skin as pale as fresh snow, almost translucent, hinting at a delicate, sheltered existence. Her forehead is high and smooth, her eyebrows plucked or shaved into barely their arches, if present at all. Her hair, if visible, is long, flowing, and often blonde, though for modesty, it's usually tucked away beneath elaborate veils or wimples. Her body is slender, almost ethereal, with a high waist and a long, graceful neck. For men, the ideal might shift slightly from the rugged knight to the more refined courtier, but both demanded a specific physique and presentation that often defied the realities of daily life. Now, let's pause and consider you, the ordinary medieval person. You wake with the sun, not to the gentle hum of an alarm clock, but perhaps to the crowing of a rooster or the urgent bleating of livestock. Your home is likely a small, smoky dwelling, shared with family and maybe even animals. Your days are spent toiling in the fields, weaving cloth, preparing meager meals, or undertaking some other physically demanding task that keeps your family fed and sheltered. This isn't a life conducive to maintaining an alabaster complexion. The sun, the wind, the dirt, the sheer physical exertion, all conspire against that delicate paleness. Your skin would be tanned, freckled, rough, and likely perpetually grimy. Trying to achieve a porcelain complexion when your daily skincare routine involves, well, mostly just hoping you don't get plague seems less like a beauty goal and more like a cosmic joke. The idea of a high, smooth forehead? For those who spent their lives squinting at the sun during harvest or hunched over intricate weaving, fine lines and wrinkles would be badges of a lived life, not imperfections to be erased. And as for those barely their eyebrows or even completely shaven brows, you'd need time, tools, and a steady hand that most people simply didn't possess. Plus, the risk of infection from crude plucking or shaving implements would be a far greater concern than achieving a perfectly arched brow. We're talking about a time when a small cut could easily become a life-threatening infection. So, the concept of meticulously grooming your face for hours on end, as perhaps a lady of the court might, is utterly alien to the rhythm of your day. This is where the impossible truly sinks in. These ideals were fundamentally at odds with the physical realities of medieval life for the vast majority of the population. The average life expectancy during this period was significantly lower than today, often in the 30s or 40s, largely due to disease, famine, and conflict. Imagine trying to maintain a youthful, delicate appearance when your body is constantly battling malnutrition, parasites, or the latest epidemic. Your focus isn't on clear skin. It's on simply having skin that isn't riddled with sores or rashes. It was less about a glow up and more about don't glow down into an early grave. The brutal truth is that medieval beauty was, by and large, a luxury. It demanded resources, time, money, and access to specific, often rare, ingredients or skilled practitioners. The wealthy nobility, who didn't spend their days digging ditches or churning butter, could afford to shield themselves from the sun, to eat a more varied diet that might contribute to healthier skin and hair, and to purchase the exotic and often dangerous cosmetics of the era. They had servants to help them with elaborate hairstyles and intricate clothing. For you, the peasant or even the struggling merchant, these resources were simply non-existent. Your clothing was practical, durable, and likely made from rough wool or linen. It wasn't designed to accentuate a slender silhouette or an elongated neck. It was designed to keep you warm and allow you to work. Moreover, the environment itself was an active antagonist to these beauty ideals. Medieval towns were notoriously unsanitary. Open sewers, waste thrown into the streets, crowded living conditions, and a general lack of understanding about germ theory meant that disease was rampant. Your skin, far from being pristine, would be constantly exposed to dirt, smoke from open fires, and a host of pathogens. Dental hygiene was rudimentary at best, leading to widespread tooth decay and loss, which hardly contributes to a dazzling smile. Even your body odor, given the infrequency of bathing and the heavy, unwashed clothing, would be distinctive. And if you thought finding a matching sock was hard, try finding a medieval beauty treatment that didn't involve mercury or lead. Good luck with that. The pursuit of this elusive beauty wasn't just impractical. It was often painful and dangerous. We'll delve deeper into the specifics later, but suffice it to say, the methods employed to achieve these looks were far from comfortable. From tight lacing to achieve a slender torso, to various concoctions applied to the skin for pallor, the process was fraught with discomfort and risk. It was a constant battle against your own natural body, your environment, and the very limited medical knowledge of the time. For many, this meant enduring chronic pain, skin irritations, and even long-term health issues, all in the often futile hope of approximating an ideal that was simply not designed for their reality. There's a fascinating, if somewhat grim, historical tidbit here too. Some medieval texts, for instance, describe rather peculiar methods for hair removal to achieve that coveted high forehead. Beyond simple plucking, which would have been painful enough without modern tweezers, there are mentions of depilatories made from highly irritating substances like arsenic-based concoctions, or even, believe it or not, mixtures containing cat dung and vinegar. Imagine the burning, the irritation, the sheer agony, all for the sake of a smooth brow. These weren't just quirky remedies. They were desperate measures, often with severe consequences, highlighting the extreme lengths people were willing to go. And this leads us to a broader question that historians still argue whether the common folk truly aspired to these elite ideals, or if their day-to-day struggle for survival left little room for such extravagant concerns. It's easy to imagine that for most, the goal wasn't to look like a fresco painting, but simply to remain healthy enough to work, to avoid starvation, and to keep their families safe. The beauty standards we discuss were largely propagated by the elite, documented in courtly literature and art, and likely filtered down to the masses as an unattainable, aspirational fantasy. So, as you settle deeper into your sleep space, consider the immense psychological burden this must have placed on individuals. Living in a society where the ideal of beauty was so far removed from your lived reality, where your natural appearance was deemed imperfect, could breed a deep sense of inadequacy. You were constantly reminded, through art, through the sight of the wealthy, and through societal expectations, that you simply did not measure up. It wasn't just about physical discomfort. It was about the mental toll of striving for an illusion, a phantom beauty that was always just out of reach. This wasn't a choice for self-expression. It was a societal mandate, enforced by the very structure of medieval life. The nightmare wasn't just about mercury in your makeup. It was about the insidious, pervasive feeling that you were inherently unbeautiful, simply by being an ordinary human trying to survive in a difficult world. As the faint echo of our last discussion fades, you find yourself stepping from the sun-drenched, bustling marketplace of medieval life into the cool, shadowed hush of a grand cathedral. Here, the very air feels different, heavier with incense and the whispers of prayer. If the first rule of medieval beauty was that it was a nightmare, then the second, perhaps even more insidious, was that it was a divine nightmare, dictated by the pervasive, all-encompassing influence of religious dogma. You see, back then, the church wasn't just a place you visited on Sundays. It was the operating system for existence, shaping everything from your breakfast to your aspirations for eternal salvation. And yes, even your face. Imagine for a moment that your favorite influencer, instead of promoting smoothie detoxes and activewear, was actually a stern, robed cleric, constantly reminding you that your mortal coil was just a temporary, rather inconvenient vessel for your immortal soul. That's pretty much the vibe. The physical body, with all its messy, fleshy realities, was often viewed with suspicion, a potential source of temptation and sin. True beauty, you were taught, resided within impiety, humility, and unwavering faith. So, how do you make outward appearance reflect an inward state that actively downplays the physical? Therein lies the medieval paradox. The ideal, you quickly learn, wasn't vibrant, robust health. Oh no, that was far too earthly, too peasant-like. Instead, you were encouraged to aspire to an ethereal, almost translucent quality. Think less glowing with health, and more glowing with the sheer effort of existing while being so spiritually pure. This meant paleness. Not just a little pale like you've spent a weekend binging historical documentaries, though that might have been a medieval pastime, who knows? But a profound, almost luminous pallor. This wasn't just about looking delicate. It was deeply intertwined with social status. In many medieval societies, a pale complexion was the ultimate signifier of nobility and leisure. If your skin was milky white, it meant you weren't toiling in the fields under the harsh sun, weren't engaged in manual labor that would give you a telltale tan. You were, by implication, a person of refinement, someone who spent their days indoors, perhaps reading illuminated manuscripts or, more likely, praying. So, while a farmer's ruddy cheeks might speak of honest labor, they certainly didn't scream spiritual purity or aristocratic privilege. It was like a medieval version of a designer handbag, an immediate visual cue to your place in the world. You didn't want to look like you just returned from a package holiday to the Costa del Sol, because, well, the Costa del Sol didn't exist, and even if it did, you definitely wouldn't want a tan. This aristocratic ideal dovetailed perfectly with religious dogma. A life of contemplation, prayer, and indoor pursuits naturally led to a lack of sun exposure. Fasting, a common penitential practice, could also contribute to a thinner, more delicate appearance. The saints, particularly female saints, were often depicted in art with faces that were less rosy-cheeked and more illuminated by divine grace, as if their very essence was too pure to fully inhabit a robust physical form. The Virgin Mary herself, the ultimate paragon of female virtue, was invariably portrayed with a serene, often very pale countenance. Her beauty derived from her purity and modesty, not from any earthly vitality. You wouldn't catch her doing hot yoga, probably. The desired effect was a kind of spiritual fragility, as if you were constantly teetering on the brink of ascending to a higher plane. Your eyes, perhaps a little shadowed, hinted at deep contemplation rather than a good night's sleep. Your overall demeanor was meant to be one of quiet humility, not boisterous confidence. It was a beauty that whispered, rather than shouted, "I am devout." It was the ultimate humble brag, but for your soul. Now, let's talk about the sickly part of the sickly beauty ideal. It wasn't about looking genuinely ill like you just wrestled a plague rat, which, let's be honest, was a distinct possibility in the Middle Ages. Instead, it was an aesthetic of delicate fragility, a look that suggested you were almost too pure, too sensitive for the rough and tumble of earthly existence. Imagine a porcelain doll, but one that's been imbued with deep spiritual wisdom. Thinness, too, was often associated with piety and self-denial. If you were abstaining from earthly pleasures, including food, within reason, of course, lest you actually starve and miss out on all that praying. A slender frame was a visual testament to your ascetic discipline. It was as if your body was being subtly refined, shedding its grosser, more worldly aspects to reveal the spiritual essence within. You wouldn't want to look like you'd just won an eating contest. In fact, you'd want to look like you'd forgotten eating was even an option. This extreme emphasis on internal purity meant that outward displays of beauty had to be carefully managed. Flashy adornments or overt sensuality were frowned upon as prideful and potentially sinful. Modesty was key. For married women, hair was almost always covered, often by elaborate veils or wimples, leaving only the face exposed. This wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a religious and social requirement, symbolizing humility and marital status. Even the necklines of gowns were generally high and demure. You were meant to inspire devotion, not distraction. It's like trying to make a fashion statement by wearing a tastefully designed potato sack. The challenge was real. Interestingly, medieval medical texts, heavily influenced by the ancient Greek theory of humors, sometimes linked complexion to temperament and even spiritual state. For example, a pale, cool complexion might be associated with a melancholic or phlegmatic humor, which were sometimes seen as more contemplative or less prone to passionate sins. So, your pale face wasn't just a sign of nobility or piety. It might also subtly suggest you were less likely to suddenly burst into a fit of rage or, heaven forbid, spontaneous dancing. It was a whole package deal. Spiritual, social, and even pseudoscientific justification for looking like you'd just seen a ghost or perhaps were a ghost. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on paleness was primarily a religious dictate, a reflection of class distinctions, or a complex interplay of both, with each reinforcing the other. Was it the church consciously pushing for an anti-physical ideal, or did it simply adopt and sanctify an aristocratic aesthetic that already existed? It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, only with more wimples and less cholesterol. What's clear is that the two forces became inextricably linked, creating a powerful, pervasive ideal that was incredibly difficult for the average person to achieve. Think about the sheer difficulty for someone who spent their days working outdoors, or who simply had a naturally darker complexion. How do you achieve that ethereal, almost sickly glow when your reality is dirt, sweat, and sunshine? You couldn't just pop to the pharmacy for some SPF 5000. The pressure to conform to this divinely sanctioned ideal must have been immense, especially for women, whose virtue and status were so often tied to their appearance. It was a beauty standard that fundamentally asked you to look like you weren't trying, while simultaneously demanding immense effort to achieve that very look of effortless purity. It's the medieval equivalent of trying to look woke up like this when you've actually spent 2 hours on hair and makeup. This religious framework created a profound psychological burden. If your natural appearance deviated from this ideal, did it mean you were less pious, less virtuous, less worthy of salvation? These were not trivial questions in a society where the fear of eternal damnation was a very real, very tangible concern. The ideal wasn't just about looking good. It was about looking good enough for God. And if you didn't quite hit that mark, well, that was a heavy cross to bear indeed. You were striving for a beauty that was inherently unattainable for most, a beauty that was less about human vibrancy and more about a ghostly echo of divine grace. And that, my dear listener, is where the brutality truly begins. You've mastered the art of looking sickly pale, a walking canvas of pious pallor, but now the canvas itself needs to be reshaped. Forget what you know about eyebrows framing the eyes or hair softening the face. In this era, your forehead isn't just a part of your face. It's the star. It's the grand stage upon which your virtue, your intelligence, and your noble breeding are meant to be displayed. And the bigger that stage, the better. Imagine, if you will, the ideal medieval woman. She possesses an almost unervingly high forehead, one that seems to stretch upwards towards the heavens, creating an elongated, oval-like visage. This wasn't just a preference. It was an obsession. A high, unblemished forehead was seen as a sign of intellect, a mark of nobility, and even, paradoxically, a symbol of spiritual purity. It suggested a mind unburdened by earthly concerns, open and expansive, much like the smooth, vast expanse of skin above your brow. You're not just trying to look pretty, you're trying to look enlightened. So, how do you achieve this architectural marvel of the face? Well, you start by saying a rather painful farewell to your natural hairline. That soft fringe, those baby hairs, even the entire front section of your hair, they've got to go. To truly emphasize the forehead, the hairline was pushed back, sometimes by inches, creating an almost dome-like effect. Think of it less as a hairstyle and more as a facial extension. You're not just pulling your hair back, you're effectively erasing part of it. The primary method for this rather brutal transformation? Plucking. Yes, you read that right. One by one, those tiny, stubborn hairs at your natural hairline are pulled out. You can almost feel the sharp, precise tug as each one detaches from your scalp, leaving behind a pinprick of discomfort. And this isn't a quick once-over. This is a meticulous, often daily, ritual. Imagine the sheer dedication. You'd spend countless hours, perhaps by the flickering light of a candle, hunched over a small, polished mirror, tweezing away. The tools were rudimentary, often simple metal tweezers, or even just 2 fingers and a strong will. The sting is sharp, then a dull ache, then another sharp sting. It's a slow, deliberate form of self-inflicted torture, all in the name of looking divinely intellectual. It's like modern eyebrow threading, but for your entire hairline, and probably with less sanitary conditions. But plucking, for some, wasn't enough, or perhaps it was too slow, too tedious for the grand vision of an utterly vast forehead. For those truly committed to the elongated look, shaving was also an option. Picture a medieval woman, carefully wielding a small, sharp blade near her temples, meticulously scraping away the delicate hairs that dared to encroach upon her forehead's sacred territory. The risk of nicks and cuts, especially with the less-than-perfect lighting and often unsterilized blades of the era, was ever present. A slip of the hand, and your quest for perfection could result in a rather unsightly gash. Not exactly the ethereal look you're going for. And then, there were the depilatories. Oh, the depilatories. These weren't the gentle creams of today that smell faintly of roses and chemicals. No, medieval depilatories were concoctions of truly dubious and often dangerous ingredients. You might find recipes calling for mixtures of quicklime, arsenic, or even cat dung and vinegar. Imagine the burning sensation, the acrid smell, the raw redness left behind by such a potent brew. The goal was to dissolve the hair, but often it dissolved a layer or 2 of skin right along with it. You'd be trading a hairy forehead for one that was possibly blistered, inflamed, or even scarred. It's enough to make you wonder if a little bit of hair wasn't so bad after all. It's a bit like deciding to get a very cheap, very painful tattoo done in a dark alley, but on your face, and with the added bonus of potential chemical burns. Now let's talk about those eyebrows, or rather, the distinct lack of them. To further enhance the vastness of the forehead and to create that elongated, almost egg-shaped facial aesthetic, eyebrows were often plucked entirely away. Yes, gone. Not just thinned, not just shaped into a delicate arch, but completely removed. Imagine your face without eyebrows. It drastically alters your expression, your perceived emotional state. You lose those subtle cues, those natural frames for your eyes. The medieval ideal was a smooth, uninterrupted expanse from the hairline, now much higher than nature intended, all the way down to the eyes. It gave the face an almost alien quality, a stark, serene emptiness that was considered utterly beautiful. It's a mainstream historical fact that the removal of eyebrows was a common practice among noblewomen in the late medieval period, particularly during the 14th and 15th centuries, to achieve this fashionable high forehead. You can see it depicted in countless paintings and illuminated manuscripts of the era, the women looking strangely serene, almost blank, without their natural brow lines. This wasn't just a passing fancy. It was a deeply ingrained aspect of beauty. The exposed, smooth forehead was a canvas, not just for skin, but for light. It reflected the soft glow of candles in a great hall, highlighting the elegant curve of your skull. It was a statement. I am so refined, so above the common concerns of mere hair, that I have chosen to remove it. And what about the hair that was left? It wasn't styled to frame the face. Quite the opposite. To further emphasize the newly expansive forehead, hair was often pulled back severely from the face, braided, coiled, and then often covered with elaborate headwear. Think of the towering hennins, those conical hats that could reach dizzying heights, often adorned with flowing veils. These structures weren't just decorative. They served a crucial purpose in framing and accentuating the unnaturally high forehead. The veils often started far back on the head, revealing the entire, smooth expanse of the forehead, drawing the eye upwards. It was a visual trick, a deliberate manipulation of perception. Even simple veils or wimples were often tied or pinned in such a way that they pulled the hair back and away, leaving the forehead utterly exposed. You might find yourself securing your veil so tightly, just to achieve that perfect pull, that you give yourself a constant, dull headache. It's a small price to pay for beauty, right? Or so you're told. Consider the daily routine. You wake up, perform your rudimentary ablutions, and then, before you even think about breakfast, you begin the painful ritual of maintaining your forehead. Plucking stray hairs, perhaps reapplying a caustic depilatory if you're brave or desperate, ensuring every single hair is banished from that sacred space. The constant vigilance, the discomfort, the sheer amount of time dedicated to this single facial feature is staggering. It makes your morning skincare routine look like a walk in the park. You might even find yourself dreaming of a world where bangs are fashionable again, just for the sheer relief of it. But what if you couldn't achieve this? What if your hair grew too quickly, too stubbornly? What if your skin was too sensitive for the harsh depilatories? The pressure would be immense. You'd feel a constant sense of inadequacy, a quiet shame, knowing you didn't quite measure up to the prevailing ideal. In a society where appearance was so intrinsically linked to status and virtue, falling short in such a prominent way would carry a heavy psychological toll. Historians still debate whether this extreme facial alteration was primarily driven by elite fashion or if it permeated lower social strata significantly, but there's no doubt that the ideal itself trickled down, creating pressure for all women who aspired to be considered beautiful. One quirky tidbit found in medieval beauty texts, often referred to as receipts or secrets, describes a concoction for hair removal that involved ants' eggs. The belief was that the formic acid in the eggs would help dissolve hair. While the efficacy is highly questionable and likely caused more irritation than hair loss, it illustrates the lengths to which people would go, experimenting with bizarre and often ineffective remedies, all in the desperate pursuit of that perfectly hairless, elongated forehead. Imagine gathering ants' eggs, meticulously, for your beauty regimen. It's a level of dedication that, frankly, makes modern beauty influencers look like amateurs. So you're left with this smooth, expansive, almost unnervingly bare forehead. It gleams in the candlelight, a testament to your piety, your intellect, and your sheer endurance of pain. It's a silent scream of dedication, a visual representation of how far you, as a medieval woman, are willing to go to fit the mold of what society deems beautiful. And it's just one piece of a much larger, often brutal puzzle. You wake with the sun, or rather, the faint light filtering through your small, leaded window, and your first thought isn't about breakfast or the day's chores. No, your mind drifts immediately to your reflection, or more accurately, the lack of one that truly pleases you. In medieval Europe, the gold standard of beauty, the very pinnacle of desirability, wasn't a sun-kissed glow or a rosy blush. Oh no, it was a pallor so profound, so utterly devoid of natural color, that you might easily be mistaken for a wraith. You are aiming for the luminous sheen of a freshly laundered sheet, perhaps even the ethereal glow of someone who has spent a good deal of time conversing with angels, or at least, avoiding any form of strenuous activity that might bring a vulgar flush to your cheeks. This wasn't just a preference. It was a profound statement. A ghostly white complexion screamed of leisure, of wealth, of a life lived indoors, far from the brutal, tanning rays of the sun that would darken the skin of peasants and laborers. It whispered of purity, of piety, of a delicate constitution that was simply too refined for the harsh realities of the world. A tan was the mark of the working class, a sign of manual labor, and utterly anathema to the noble woman or the aspiring courtier. So you would embark on a daily ritual, a cosmetic crusade, that involved substances so perilous, so utterly toxic, they make modern chemical peels look like a gentle facial massage. The star of this deadly show, the undisputed king of medieval pallor, was a concoction known simply as ceruse. Picture it, a thick, heavy white paste, often made from white lead mixed with vinegar or oil. It wasn't some lightweight, breathable foundation you might dab on today. This was a substantial, almost painterly application. You would carefully, meticulously, Layer this opaque cream onto your face, neck, and décolletage, effectively creating a mask of artificial alabaster. The goal was complete coverage, an unblemished, uniform whiteness that obliterated any hint of natural skin tone, any whisper of freckles, or any unfortunate flush from exertion or emotion. It was the ultimate filter applied directly to your face, only this filter came with a rather alarming list of side effects. Imagine the sensation as you apply it. It's cool and heavy, perhaps a little gritty, as you smooth it over your skin. The faint, metallic tang might be masked by whatever perfumes or floral waters have been added, but the underlying chemical reality is there. Feels like you're literally painting yourself, and in a way you are. You might even find yourself holding your breath a little, not just from concentration, but from the slight, acrid scent that might cling to the air. This ceruse, this darling of medieval beauty, was pure lead. And as you might recall from any basic science class, lead is a neurotoxin. A very, very efficient one. The immediate effect, stunning at least by medieval standards. You would instantly transform, your face becoming a canvas of stark, unblemished white, framed perhaps by your carefully plucked high forehead. You looked ethereal, otherworldly, precisely the delicate, fragile beauty so admired. But the long-term effects were, shall we say, less charming. As you continued your daily application, day after day, week after week, the lead would slowly but surely leach into your skin, entering your bloodstream. Your skin, ironically, would be the first to suffer the consequences of your quest for perfection. It would begin to dry, to crack, to develop unsightly sores and rashes. The very product designed to give you a flawless complexion would, over time, destroy it. You might notice a strange discoloration, a grayish pallor beneath the artificial white, as if your skin itself were decaying. Your teeth might begin to blacken, your gums to recede, and a telltale lead line might appear along your gum line, a grim dark stripe announcing your slow poisoning. Your hair, once perhaps a point of pride, even if mostly covered, might start to thin and fall out in patches. And if your skin started flaking off, well, that just meant the product was really working, right? Just a little exfoliation, medieval style. It's like your skin is trying to tell you something, but you're too busy being fashion forward. The internal damage was far more insidious. Lead poisoning doesn't just affect your looks. It systematically attacks your entire body. You would likely suffer from debilitating headaches, chronic fatigue, and muscle weakness. Your digestive system would rebel, leading to severe abdominal pain and constipation. Your joints would ache, your limbs might tingle, and eventually the poison would begin to affect your nervous system. Tremors, paralysis, and even cognitive decline were common outcomes. Your mind might cloud, your memory falter, and your personality could even change, making you irritable or depressed. Historians still debate the precise level of public awareness regarding the long-term dangers of these lead-based cosmetics. While the immediate skin irritation and disfigurement were obvious, the connection between a cosmetic paste and organ failure or neurological damage wasn't always clear to medieval minds, especially with limited medical knowledge. After all, if the most fashionable people were using it, how bad could it really be? Finding your perfect shade match back then was less about undertones and more about, how much lead can my liver handle today? But ceruse wasn't the only dangerous player in the medieval beauty arsenal. Some desperate souls, in their relentless pursuit of that coveted ghostly pallor, might turn to even more extreme measures. There are accounts, albeit less common, of mercury being incorporated into certain skin preparations. Mercury, another heavy metal, has its own delightful set of toxic effects, including neurological damage, kidney failure, and severe skin irritation leading to peeling and scarring. It's a bit like choosing between being slowly corroded or swiftly poisoned. Neither option screams spa day. Then there was arsenic. While not as widely used for direct facial application as lead, arsenic compounds were sometimes ingested in tiny doses, often in the form of arsenic wafers, believed to purify the blood and contribute to a delicate, pale complexion. Imagine your medieval influencer tutorial. First, we're going for that just seen a ghost and maybe are a ghost vibe. Apply liberally, and then maybe take a little bite of this wafer of doom. This practice was incredibly dangerous, leading to chronic poisoning, internal organ damage, and eventually, death. Scholars continue to discuss how widely known the dangers of arsenic ingestion for beauty truly were, with some arguing it was a desperate, last resort measure taken by those truly obsessed, while others suggest a darker, more widespread ignorance. Beyond the truly deadly, you also had less lethal but still harsh methods. To further enhance that ethereal glow, you might apply diluted vinegar or lemon juice to your face, hoping their acidic properties would bleach your skin. While not immediately fatal like lead or arsenic, these acids would strip your skin of its natural oils, leaving it dry, irritated, and prone to flaking. It was a constant battle against nature, a relentless assault on your body in the name of an unnatural ideal. And for a truly fringe, yet historically documented method of achieving pallor, you might even invite a barber surgeon to drain a little blood from you. The practice of bloodletting, deeply rooted in the medieval theory of humors, was believed to balance the body and treat various ailments. But for the beauty-conscious, a small, controlled bleeding could also induce a temporary, delicate pallor, a fragile look that perfectly encapsulated the desired aristocratic feebleness. You wouldn't be doing it for direct beauty application, but rather for the systemic effect of slight blood loss, leaving you feeling weak, dizzy, and, crucially, very, very pale. It was a rather dramatic shortcut to looking like you'd just survived a serious illness, which, given the other beauty practices, you probably had. So, as you lay in your bed, listening to the gentle creak of the floorboards or the distant hoot of an owl, consider the sheer audacity of medieval beauty. It wasn't about enhancing your natural features. It was about erasing them. It wasn't about health. It was about an outward display of fragility, even if it meant sacrificing your very life force. The quest for that perfect, ghostly white complexion was a testament to the era's brutal standards, a chilling reminder that for many, beauty wasn't just skin deep, but bone deep and often fatal. You were literally poisoning yourself for perfection, slowly decaying from the inside out, all to achieve the coveted look of someone who had never seen a day of hard labor, or perhaps a day of true health. The irony, of course, being that the very tools used to achieve this ethereal glow would often leave you looking far worse than any natural imperfection ever could. So, you've painstakingly plucked your eyebrows into oblivion. You've potentially even used a depilatory cream to raise your hairline, creating that vast, serene expanse of forehead that screams, "I am pious and intelligent, and also, my head is a billboard for my devotion." But what about the rest of your hair? The long, flowing tresses you might imagine cascading down a maiden's back in a storybook? Well, for the vast majority of medieval women, particularly those who were married, those locks were less about glory and more about, well, shame. Or more accurately, modesty, and a whole lot of elaborate concealment. You see, in the medieval world, especially for a married woman, your hair was considered a potent symbol of your modesty, your virtue, and frankly, your marital status. To display your hair openly, particularly if you were a married woman, was often seen as scandalous, a sign of moral laxity, or even an invitation to temptation. It was a private asset, meant only for your husband's eyes, tucked away from the prying gaze of the world. Think of it as the ultimate bad hair day solution, except it was every day, for your entire married life. And honestly, sometimes you just know those women were thinking, "Thank goodness for this wimple. My roots are a disaster." This wasn't just a fashion trend. It was deeply rooted in religious dogma and societal expectation. The New Testament, particularly the writings of St. Paul, contained verses that were interpreted to mean women should cover their heads as a sign of submission and modesty. "Every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head," states one such passage. And in a society where the church held immense sway, these interpretations translated directly into everyday life, shaping not just spiritual practice, but also what was considered proper and beautiful for a woman. You walk through the bustling market, and you observe the women around you. Young, unmarried girls might have their hair braided and adorned, perhaps with ribbons or simple circlets. But once they've said their vows, their heads disappear under layers of fabric. It's a visual cue, a public declaration of their new status, a kind of sartorial chastity belt for the head. So, how did you manage this concealment? It wasn't just a simple scarf thrown over your head. Oh no, my dear listener, this was the Middle Ages, where even modesty had to be an art form. For the elite, the layers of concealment became incredibly elaborate, transforming into magnificent displays of wealth and status. You'd start by braiding your hair, often in two long plaits. These braids weren't always just your own hair, either. Sometimes, for added volume and length, you'd incorporate false hair, or even silk threads, to make the braids appear impossibly thick and luxurious. Imagine the sheer effort, hours spent meticulously weaving and pinning, only for it all to be hidden away. It's like spending all day baking a magnificent cake, then putting it in a box and never showing anyone. Once braided, these heavy plaits would then be coiled around your head, or pinned up against your ears, sometimes tucked into decorative nets called cauls. These cauls could be simple linen, or for the wealthy, made of gold thread, pearls, and jewels, shimmering subtly beneath the outermost layer. Think of it as a fancy hairnet, but one that cost more than your neighbor's cow. Over this, you don a wimple, a piece of cloth, usually linen, that covered your neck, chin, and ears, often pinned up to your hair or under your veil. It was like a medieval balaclava, designed to create a smooth, unbroken line from your chin to your forehead, further emphasizing that coveted, elongated face. And finally, over all of this came the veil itself. The veil, or kerchief, could be a simple piece of white linen, or for the truly affluent, fine silk, perhaps even embroidered or edged with gold. It would drape over your head, often pinned to the wimple and cauls, creating a soft frame around your face. The overall effect, for a noblewoman, was one of serene, almost ethereal beauty. A smooth, high forehead, a pale complexion, which we've already discussed, involved some truly questionable methods, and a face framed by pristine white linen or shimmering silk. The hair itself was gloriously unseen, yet its very existence, its hidden length and thickness, was implied by the smooth, rounded shape of the head underneath the covering, hinting at the wealth and health required to grow such a magnificent, if unseen, mane. This brings us to the glory aspect. Even hidden, your hair was still a symbol of status. Long, thick, healthy hair indicated good nutrition and good health, which in turn suggested a higher social standing. Only the wealthy could afford a diet rich enough to support such luxuriant growth. So, while you couldn't show your hair, the very effort and expense put into its care, and the elaborate headwear used to conceal it, spoke volumes. It was an unspoken boast, a quiet declaration of your family's prosperity. It's like owning a ridiculously expensive car, but only ever driving it in your garage. Everyone knows it's there, and that's enough. The more extravagant the headwear, the higher your standing. You see women parading through the court with towering hennins, those conical hats you often see in illustrations, sometimes over a foot tall, with a veil flowing from the peak. Or the butterfly headdress, where the veil was stretched over wire frames, resembling delicate wings. These weren't just fashion. They were architectural marvels, often so wide you'd have to turn sideways to get through a doorway. Imagine trying to navigate a crowded banquet hall with a small house on your head. These flamboyant headpieces often necessitated shaving the front of the scalp even more aggressively than just plucking the hairline, to ensure a smooth, uninterrupted line from the forehead to the base of the hennin. The goal was to create an unbroken, almost alien silhouette, pushing the boundaries of what was considered humanly possible, let alone comfortable. This extreme concealment and the elaborate coverings also highlight a curious paradox. While hair was hidden as a sign of modesty, the quality of the hidden hair and the expense of the covering became a major status symbol. A peasant woman might wear a simple linen coif and veil, pragmatic and unadorned. A noblewoman, however, would have veils of fine silk, perhaps embroidered with gold thread, worn over a meticulously arranged coiffure, even if that coiffure was entirely obscured. The humble hairnet for the commoner becomes a jewel-encrusted caul for the lady of the manor. It was the medieval equivalent of wearing designer underwear. Nobody sees it, but you know it's there, and that makes all the difference. What about men's hair, you might wonder? While the strictures weren't as severe as for women, men also had their own evolving hair standards. Early medieval knights often sported longer hair and beards, symbolizing strength and virility. But as the centuries progressed, especially by the high and late Middle Ages, you see a shift towards shorter, neatly trimmed hair, often a bowl cut or a pageboy style, sometimes with an exaggerated fringe. Beards went in and out of fashion too, depending on the period and region. So, while women were busy hiding their hair, men were busy making sure theirs looked just so, avoiding the wild look that might suggest a lack of civility or control. Nobody wants to be seen as uncivilized, especially not when you're trying to impress the local lord's daughter. The constant pressure to conform to these strict hair ideals, whether through concealment or styling, meant that even something as natural as your hair became a source of anxiety and effort. You might spend hours a day just getting your headwear right, ensuring every pin was in place, every fold of linen lay perfectly smooth. And the weight, imagine carrying all that fabric, sometimes with wires and jewels, on your head for hours on end. It was enough to give anyone a permanent crick in the neck. Historians still argue whether the extreme plucking of the hairline was as universal as popular imagination suggests, or if it was more a high-fashion, courtly trend, with rural women perhaps adhering to less drastic measures. But what is undeniable is the profound symbolic weight placed on women's hair. It was a battleground of piety, status, and perceived beauty, where modesty often demanded elaborate, costly, and uncomfortable concealment. Your hair, whether proudly displayed or meticulously hidden, was never just hair. It was a statement that, for medieval women, often involved a lifetime of pulling, pinning, and perfecting, all for something no one was truly meant to see. You've mastered the art of the gravity-defying forehead and the ghostly pallor, but hold on to your breath, because now we get to the real squeeze, the torso. Imagine the medieval ideal as a kind of human hourglass, but one where the sand mostly just trickles down, never quite filling the bottom. The desired silhouette was slender, elongated, almost impossibly flat in the stomach, and high-breasted. It was a shape that whispered of grace and, crucially, of a certain demure, almost ethereal presence. You weren't supposed to look robust or earthy. You were meant to appear refined, almost as if sustained by prayer and good intentions alone, rather than, actual food. To achieve this elusive, almost two-dimensional ideal, you strapped in. And when I say strapped in, I mean really strapped in. Forget your modern-day Spanx. We're talking about garments designed not just to smooth, but to actively reshape, to compress, to quite literally mold your very being into the fashionable line. The tools of this torture varied depending on the exact century and your social standing, but the principle remained the same. Make it flat, make it long, make it unyielding. For women, this often meant kirtles or gowns with bodices that were not just fitted, but stiffened and laced. Picture a garment made of multiple layers of sturdy linen or canvas, perhaps even interlined with pasteboard, reeds, or even thin strips of wood to provide rigidity. This wasn't a soft, flowing tunic. It was a wearable cage. You'd pull on this foundational layer, and then, with the help of a maid or a long-suffering family member, begin the process of lacing. And lacing wasn't just decorative. It was functional, designed to draw the garment tight, to flatten the stomach, to push the breasts upwards and together, creating that high, conical, almost shelf-like bust that was so admired. It was a full-body embrace by a garment that had no intention of letting you breathe freely. Imagine the sensation. The firm, unyielding pressure around your ribs, the way your diaphragm struggles for purchase, the constant awareness of your own body being constrained. Every breath becomes a conscious effort, shallow and unsatisfying. Eating a hearty meal? Forget about it. You might manage a few bites before the pressure becomes unbearable, leaving you with a perpetually half-full, or perhaps half-starved feeling. This wasn't about comfort. It was about conformity. Your internal organs were simply expected to make do, to shuffle around and find new homes within the newly defined boundaries of your torso. It's a bit like trying to fit a king-size duvet into a pillowcase. Something's going to get squished. The quest for this slender silhouette wasn't just about looking good. It was deeply intertwined with notions of modesty and social status. A high, firm bust and a flat stomach conveyed a sense of youthful purity and unburdened grace. A protruding belly, even a slightly rounded one, could hint at pregnancy or, worse, a lack of self-control when it came to food, both highly undesirable in the courtly aesthetic. So you endured the discomfort, the chafing of the stiff fabric against your skin, the occasional dizzy spell when you moved too quickly, because the alternative was social ostracization. You simply weren't considered proper if your figure didn't conform to the prevailing fashion. Mainstream historical fact asterisk: while the rigid, heavily boned corsets of the Victorian era are a later development, early forms of body-shaping garments, often referred to as stays or stiffened bodices, were indeed prevalent in the later medieval period and the Renaissance. These garments, often laced tightly, were specifically designed to flatten the stomach, raise the bust, and create the desired elongated, conical torso silhouette. The goal was to achieve a smooth, unbroken line from the shoulders to the hips, often referred to as a straight-fronted look. The materials used for these early shaping garments were surprisingly diverse. Beyond linen and canvas, there's evidence of various stiffeners. Sometimes, layers of buckram, a stiffened cloth, were sewn together. Other times, materials like reeds, cord, or even pasteboard were inserted into channels sewn into the fabric to provide the necessary rigidity. Imagine wearing a garment that felt less like clothing and more like a portable, flexible suit of armor, except this armor was designed to restrict, not protect. Quirky tidbit asterisk: some accounts even mention the use of boiled leather or finely shaved horn as stiffeners, providing a truly unyielding form to the garment. One can only imagine the sheer joy of a hot summer's day wearing what was essentially a leather chest plate designed for maximum constriction. The physical toll was significant. Beyond the constant discomfort and difficulty breathing, there were more serious implications. Digestion would have been a nightmare, leading to chronic indigestion and constipation. The pressure on internal organs could lead to displacement over time, and the restriction of movement weakened core muscles, leading to reliance on the garment for support rather than developing natural strength. Fainting spells were not uncommon, often attributed to delicate sensibilities rather than the simple fact that you were slowly suffocating yourself in the name of fashion. It's enough to make you appreciate the simple freedom of wearing sweatpants on a Tuesday. Historians still argue whether the extreme tight lacing depicted in some period artworks was a widespread reality for most women, or if it was more of an artistic exaggeration of an ideal. While it's clear that shaping garments were worn, the degree of actual torso torture likely varied greatly depending on social class, individual tolerance, and the specific fashion trends of a given decade. Was every woman laced so tightly she could barely breathe? Probably not. But was the ideal always one that demanded a significant degree of constriction and discomfort? Absolutely. The pressure to conform was immense, and for many, the physical discomfort was simply part of the price of admission to polite society. For men, the ideal was different but no less demanding in its own way. While they generally weren't lacing themselves into conical shapes, the expectation was often for a lean, athletic build, especially for knights and courtiers. Tunics and doublets were cut to emphasize broad shoulders and a narrow waist, sometimes achieved through clever tailoring, but also through the sheer physical demands of a knight's training. If you weren't naturally built like a lean, fighting machine, you were expected to train until you were. It was less about artificial constriction and more about natural, albeit grueling, physical conditioning. So, while you might not have been gasping for air in a tight bodice, you might have been gasping for air after a full day of jousting practice. Pick your poison, I suppose. The effort involved in simply getting dressed was monumental. Imagine needing assistance every single morning just to put on your basic undergarments. The lacing, the pulling, the adjusting, it was a daily ritual of self-inflicted discipline. And once you were in, you were in. Sitting down could be awkward, bending over almost impossible, and any sudden movements were met with a painful reminder of your sartorial straitjacket. You probably perfected a very particular, stiff-backed walk, a sort of elegant shuffle that conveyed poise while simultaneously preventing you from splitting your seams. It makes your morning struggle with a stubborn zipper seem utterly trivial by comparison. This relentless pursuit of the slender silhouette was a core component of medieval beauty. It wasn't just about what you wore. It was about how you became the garment, how your body surrendered to the dictates of fashion. It was a constant reminder that your natural form was, in some ways, imperfect and required improvement through the deliberate application of pressure and constraint. And as you drift off to sleep, Perhaps take a moment to appreciate the unencumbered freedom of your own torso, free to expand and contract with every breath, unburdened by reeds, whalebone, or the crushing weight of medieval expectations. You've plucked your hairline, perhaps even nibbled on some questionable arsenic, all in the name of medieval beauty. But even after all that, you still need a little help, don't you? This is where fashion, your silent accomplice, steps in. Forget your modern shapewear or those cleverly angled selfies. Medieval clothing was the original master of illusion, a grand theatrical costume designed to both trumpet your adherence to impossible ideals and, with a knowing wink, artfully conceal every single natural imperfection that dared to deviate from them. It was the ultimate medieval Photoshop, long before pixels were even a twinkle in a scientist's eye. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer volume of fabric. You're not just slipping into a dress. You're entering a carefully constructed architectural marvel of cloth. The ideal silhouette, as we've discussed, was long, slender, and almost ethereal. How do you achieve that when you're, well, a human being with curves and joints and a tendency to, eat? The answer lies in the ingenious manipulation of textiles. You encounter garments like the houppelande, a majestic, voluminous outer gown, often belted high under the bust, creating an illusion of an impossibly high waist and an elongated upper body. The fabric then cascaded downwards, sweeping the floor, making your legs seem miles long, or, more accurately, making it impossible to tell where your legs even began. It's like wearing a very fancy, very fashionable tent that somehow makes you look taller and thinner. This wasn't just about looking good. It was about looking otherworldly, almost defying the laws of gravity with your apparent height and grace. You'd think all that fabric would make you look wider. But no, the clever cut and high belt cinched you in just enough to create that coveted, slender line before the fabric billowed out. It was a masterclass in controlled drapery, a visual trick that made you appear both slender and substantial, a walking paradox of fashion. Then there's the matter of your complexion. After all those dangerous potions, you want your ghostly pallor to truly shine. Medieval clothing, with its rich, often deep jewel tones, think sapphire blues, ruby reds, emerald greens, acted as the perfect contrasting canvas. These vibrant hues made your already pale skin appear even more luminous, almost translucent. It's the visual equivalent of putting a spotlight on a sheet of paper. The darker background intensifies the perceived brightness. You might be feeling a bit green from your latest beauty treatment, but your dress? Oh, your dress. It's making your skin look like fresh snow under a winter sky. It's a subtle but powerful accentuation, a silent cheer for your commitment to the divine standard of paleness. And let's not forget that magnificent, plucked to the heavens forehead. How do you draw even more attention to it? With headwear, of course. You'd encounter the truly fantastical hennin, a towering cone-shaped hat that could reach astonishing heights, sometimes over a foot tall, draped with delicate veils. Or the equally dramatic butterfly headdress, with its wire frame supporting vast expanses of sheer fabric, making it look as though you might take flight at any moment. These creations weren't just decorative. They were architectural statements designed to pull the eye upwards, elongating your face even further and showcasing that bald, shining expanse of forehead. Imagine trying to navigate a doorway with one of those things on. It's a wonder medieval architects didn't just design all their entrances like grand arches. It's the ultimate look at my forehead accessory, screaming your devotion to the era's bizarre cranial aesthetic. Now, let's pivot to the other side of the fashion coin: concealment. Because while you're striving for perfection, reality, as it often does, tends to get in the way. Perhaps your skin, despite all your efforts, isn't quite as unblemished as you'd like. Maybe those mercury concoctions have left a less than desirable rash. Or you've got a breakout that stubbornly refuses to adhere to the smooth as marble ideal. This is where high necklines, long sleeves that covered every inch of your arm, and those ever-present veils came into their own. They were the original full-coverage makeup, but in fabric form. A strategically draped wimple could hide a multitude of facial blemishes, while the voluminous sleeves of a houppelande could easily conceal any skin irritations or even the less-than-toned arm you might possess. You could be a walking petri dish of medieval skin ailments underneath, and no one would be any the wiser. It's like having a permanent good side that's just all of you covered. And then there's the hair. Oh, the hair. While we touched upon its status as a symbol of glory or shame, for many medieval women, particularly married ones, it was a requirement to keep it covered. This wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a deeply ingrained cultural and religious dictate. As a mainstream historical fact, the widespread use of veils, wimples, and various forms of head coverings for women, especially married women, was a prevalent practice across much of medieval Europe, signifying modesty, marital status, and social respectability. So, whether your hair was thin, unruly, or simply not meeting the ideal length or color, it could be neatly tucked away under layers of linen coifs, wimples that framed the face, or those elaborate hennons. It's the ultimate medieval solution to a bad hair day. Just make it disappear entirely. Think of it as the original hat hair prevention, except the hat was the hair. You could have a rat's nest under there, and no one would ever know. It was quite liberating, in a way, if you didn't mind the constant pressure on your head. Beyond just covering skin or hair, clothing was a master at disguising the natural human form itself. Those voluminous gowns, while accentuating height, were also incredibly adept at hiding the true shape of the body underneath. A woman could be pregnant, and for months, her condition could be almost entirely concealed by the generous folds of fabric. This was particularly crucial for unmarried women, where an obvious pregnancy could lead to severe social ostracization. But even for married women, maintaining the slender ideal was paramount, and clothing provided the perfect camouflage. It's the medieval equivalent of wearing an oversized hoodie to hide that extra slice of pie you had at dinner, but on a much grander, more socially significant scale. You could be carrying twins, and people might just think you'd had a particularly hearty meal. Consider the sheer layering involved. You'd start with a chemise, a thin linen undergarment, then perhaps a tight-fitting coat-hardy, which might have its own lacing or rudimentary boning for shaping, followed by the outer houppelande or another gown. This wasn't just for warmth in drafty castles. It was about building up a specific silhouette, adding padding where needed or desired, and smoothing out any unwanted bulges. It's like having multiple layers of body shapers, each designed to refine the overall illusion. The medieval wardrobe was less about showing off what you had and more about creating an ideal of what you should have. Now for a quirky tidbit. While we often think of medieval fashion as being quite rigid, there were moments of surprising flamboyance and even a touch of playful deception. For instance, some garments, particularly for men but occasionally for women, incorporated dagging, decorative cuts or slashes in the fabric, often along the edges of sleeves or hems. While primarily aesthetic, these sometimes revealed glimpses of contrasting lining, adding visual interest. But more interestingly, some wealthy individuals would have their outer garments lined with fur, not just for warmth, but as a subtle or not-so-subtle display of wealth, only visible when the garment moved or was intentionally opened. It was like having a secret, luxurious interior, a hidden flex of your financial muscles. Imagine someone accidentally flashing their sable lining and everyone in the room gasping, "Oh, did I do that? My mistake, it's just my casual lynx lining." Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of many voluminous medieval garments was purely aesthetic, designed to create an ideal silhouette, or also highly practical, offering warmth and concealing imperfections in an age without modern sanitation or easy access to baths. It's a chicken or egg scenario for medieval fashion historians. Was it about looking good, or about dealing with the realities of life in a less than sanitary world? Probably a bit of both, leaning heavily on the looking good part given the extremes. The sheer discomfort of some of these outfits, designed for accentuation and concealment, should not be underestimated. Imagine being swathed in heavy wool or velvet, layered multiple times, perhaps with a tight lacing underneath, all while trying to maintain an air of ethereal grace. It was a personal sauna you wore everywhere, a walking heat trap. You'd probably be sweating buckets under those layers, but hey, at least your pores would be getting a good cleanse, right? Though probably not in the way you'd want. And those elaborate headpieces, they weren't light. Balancing a tall hennin for hours on end must have been an absolute neck workout. It's a testament to the power of societal pressure that people willingly endured such physical burdens day in and day out. In essence, medieval fashion was a masterclass in visual storytelling. It was about presenting an ideal, a curated image of piety, grace, and an almost otherworldly beauty, while simultaneously acting as a very effective cloak for the less-than-ideal realities of human existence. You weren't just wearing clothes. You were wearing a carefully constructed illusion, a silent declaration of your adherence to a brutal and often impossible beauty standard. And if anyone dared to look too closely, well, there was always another layer of fabric to hide behind. Now, as we drift deeper into the peculiar world of medieval beauty, let's confront a rather aromatic truth. You've heard whispers of the grand castles and the shimmering silks, but have you ever paused to consider what it really smelled like to live in those times? Or how one maintained a beautiful complexion when the concept of soap was, shall we say, a bit rustic? Prepare yourself, because we're about to plunge into the grim reality of medieval hygiene, and trust me, it's a far cry from your morning shower routine. Imagine, if you will, a world where the daily shower is not just unheard of, but actively considered suspicious. You might find yourself reaching for a washcloth and some rose water, or perhaps a basin of plain cold water, for a quick splash on the face and hands. A full body bath? That was an event, a serious undertaking, often reserved for special occasions or, more commonly, for medicinal purposes. Mainstream historical fact alert. For many, bathing might happen only a few times a year, perhaps at significant holidays like Christmas or Easter, or after a long, arduous journey. It wasn't about feeling fresh and clean in the way we understand it today. It was about ritual or perhaps chasing away a persistent ailment. The idea of daily immersion, of scrubbing away every last trace of the day's dust and sweat, simply wasn't part of the cultural lexicon. You'd wake up, perhaps wipe down with a damp cloth, and then layer on your clothes, ready to face a world that was, by modern standards, perpetually lived in. This infrequent interaction with water had a profound impact on the skin. Your complexion, the very canvas upon which medieval beauty ideals were painted, was constantly battling the elements. Soot from open fires, dust from unpaved streets, and the accumulated grime of days, even weeks, without a proper cleanse. Think about your elaborate skincare routine now, the cleansers, the toners, the serums, the moisturizers. Now gently erase all of that from your mind. Your medieval counterpart might have used an abrasive cloth, or perhaps a concoction of herbs and oils to cleanse, but the effect would be minimal compared to our modern methods. The result? Skin that was often dull, prone to breakouts, and prematurely aged by exposure and lack of proper care. That coveted pallor we discussed earlier? It wasn't just achieved with lead-based paints. It was also, quite frankly, the natural consequence of poor circulation, lack of sun exposure indoors, and skin that rarely felt the invigorating rush of clean water. It's almost as if your glow-up, back then, was just successfully avoiding the plague for another week. And speaking of skin, let's talk about the face, the focal point of so many beauty ideals. With such rudimentary hygiene, acne, rashes, and various skin ailments were simply a fact of life. There were no salicylic acids or retinoids to clear pores. Instead, you might try a poultice of bread and milk, or perhaps something more questionable, like pigeon droppings, to draw out impurities. The desire for a smooth, unblemished face was immense, but the tools to achieve it were woefully inadequate. This led to a heavy reliance on cosmetics, not just to enhance features but to conceal. Think of the thick white lead paint used to achieve that ghostly pallor. It wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a practical necessity to hide a multitude of skin sins. You'd be layering it on, not just for aesthetic appeal, but to create a smooth, porcelain-like mask over skin that was likely far from perfect underneath. Now, let's pivot to something even more intimate: your mouth. Dental hygiene in the Middle Ages was, to put it mildly, a challenge. Sugar was a luxury, but honey, dried fruits, and other natural sweeteners were common, especially among the wealthy. Combine that with a complete lack of modern dental care, and you can imagine the state of teeth. Brushing, as we know it, didn't exist. You might chew on a fresh twig, or rub your teeth with a rough cloth. Some even used abrasive powders made from crushed eggshells, or bizarrely, even brick dust, which, while perhaps removing some surface stains, would certainly erode enamel over time. Quirky tidbit alert. There are records of people using a mixture of burnt rosemary and peppermint to clean their teeth, which sounds a bit like an ill-fated medieval toothpaste experiment. The prevalence of tooth decay, gum disease, and missing teeth meant that a perfect, pearly white smile was not only rare, but not even a beauty ideal. In fact, blackened or missing teeth were so common that they were simply accepted. Imagine the breath. The medieval dentist's motto, if they had one, might well have been, "It's only a problem if it stops you from eating, eventually." And this brings us to the grand finale of medieval hygiene, the pervasive, undeniable, and utterly unavoidable reality of body odor. Without daily bathing, without antiperspirants, without the concept of changing clothes daily, especially among the lower classes, the air would have been thick with the scent of humanity. Sweat, stale fabrics, unwashed hair, and the constant presence of animals and waste would have created an olfactory landscape that would send most modern noses into shock. Your wool tunic, worn for weeks or even months between washes, would absorb every scent, every drop of perspiration, becoming a veritable tapestry of personal aromas. Imagine stepping into a crowded medieval feast hall, or a bustling marketplace, or even just a small cottage. It would be an assault on the senses, a symphony of smells that we, with our deodorants and laundry detergents, can barely conceive of. So, how did they cope with this overwhelming reality? They masked it, heavily. This is where perfumes, or rather strong, musky scents and pomanders, came into play. A pomander, a small, often ornate ball filled with fragrant materials like ambergris, civet, or spices, would be carried or worn to ward off unpleasant smells, or, more accurately, to provide a small, personal bubble of better smell. These perfumes were not delicate floral notes. They were often powerful, almost cloying, designed to cut through and overpower the ambient stench. Open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of such potent perfumes was primarily for masking offensive odors, or if it also had a deeper, perhaps even medicinal significance, with people believing certain scents could ward off disease. Whatever the reason, the sheer quantity and strength of these masking agents tell a story of a world where unpleasant smells were simply part of the fabric of daily life. The contrast between the idealized beauty and the grim reality of hygiene is stark. You were expected to project an image of ethereal pallor, an unblemished complexion, and a demure presence, all while grappling with skin issues, dental decay, and pervasive body odor that would make your modern self recoil. There was no escaping the physical realities of medieval life, and yet, the beauty standards demanded a transcendence of these very realities. It was a constant battle, a never-ending effort to present a facade of perfection in a world that offered very little in the way of true cleanliness or comfort. The pursuit of beauty, in this context, was not just about adornment. It was about an elaborate, often painful, and ultimately Sisyphean struggle against the very nature of existence itself. You might try to achieve that high, smooth forehead, or that slender silhouette, but underneath it all, the reality of medieval hygiene clung to you like a stubborn, invisible shroud. Imagine trying to get a date when your best pickup line is, "I bathed last Michaelmas." The struggle was real, and it was certainly pungent. You've been drifting through a world of impossible beauty, haven't you? A landscape of elongated foreheads and ghostly pallor, where looking good often meant feeling, well, not so good. But now, as your mind drifts deeper into the quiet hum of history, let's talk about something even more insidious than lead paint on your face: the invisible hand of social class. Because, you see, in the medieval world, beauty wasn't just a brutal ideal, it was a brutal privilege. Imagine, if you will, two women in the same bustling market square. One, a noblewoman, her silken gown rustling softly as she passes. The other, a peasant, her rough wool tunic stained with the day's labor. Both are subject to the pervasive beauty standards of the age, yes, but their ability to even attempt to meet them? Worlds apart. It's like trying to win a marathon when one runner has a private jet to the finish line and the other is still tying their shoelaces with a piece of twine. For the vast majority, the everyday folks toiling in the fields, baking bread, or spinning wool, the very concept of beauty rituals was, frankly, a luxury they couldn't even dream of. Their days were a relentless grind, from dawn till dusk, simply to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. There was no time for elaborate hair arrangements, no leisure for hours spent in a perfumed bath, if they even had a bath. Their hands were calloused from work, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their bodies often stooped from physical labor. These were the hallmarks of survival, not of the delicate, ethereal beauty celebrated in the courts. Think about it, that coveted pale complexion we talked about? For a peasant, spending all day under the unforgiving sun, it was an impossibility. Their skin would naturally darken, a sign of their outdoor life and physical exertion. And those tiny, delicate hands, unblemished and long-fingered, the hands of a woman who spent her days milking cows or tilling soil would be anything but. They were strong, yes, capable, absolutely, but not the soft, white, almost useless appendages idealized by the wealthy. Then there's the matter of resources. Achieving that ghostly pallor required expensive, often dangerous, concoctions. Lead-based paints, mercury, arsenic, these weren't items you'd pick up at your local medieval general store with a few coppers. They were costly, often imported, and accessible only to those with significant disposable income. A peasant woman trying to achieve a pale complexion might resort to scrubbing her face with harsh lye soap, which would probably just leave her with irritated, red skin, or perhaps dusting her face with flour, which, let's be honest, would make her look less like a lady of leisure and more like a very confused, haunted baker. Just a little chuckle there, imagining the flour cloud. The same went for clothing. We've discussed how fashion was manipulated to create the ideal silhouette, the high waist, the elongated torso. But those flowing gowns, made of fine wool, linen, or even imported silk, dyed with vibrant and expensive pigments, were the exclusive domain of the rich. A mainstream historical fact here is that dyes like true cochineal, for brilliant reds, or Tyrian purple, derived from sea snails, were incredibly costly, often reserved for royalty or the highest nobility. So, while a noblewoman could parade in a gown of shimmering crimson, carefully cut to accentuate her slender form, a peasant woman would likely wear undyed, coarse wool or linen, in drab earth tones, patched and mended until it literally fell apart. Her clothing was purely functional, offering warmth and protection, with no thought given to fashion. And those elaborate hairstyles, often requiring hours of intricate braiding or the addition of false hair. Again, time was the ultimate luxury. A noblewoman had the leisure and, more importantly, the servants to dedicate hours to her coiffure. She might even have an entire retinue of ladies-in-waiting, all vying to perfect her look. It was, in a way, the original personal assistant service long before we had apps for that. Meanwhile, the working woman would likely tie her hair back simply to keep it out of her way as she worked, or tuck it under a simple coif. Forget delicate veils or jeweled nets. Practicality reigned supreme. Consider the notion of faking beauty. For the elite, this was an art form. If your natural hair wasn't long enough or thick enough for the fashionable braids, you could acquire elaborate false hairpieces. If your figure wasn't quite slender enough, you could rely on cleverly constructed stays and padding within your gowns to create the desired silhouette. These were not cheap tricks. They were signs of wealth, signifying your ability to employ skilled craftspeople and purchase expensive materials. You could even use perfumes, made from rare spices and oils, to mask the less than pleasant realities of medieval hygiene, creating an illusion of freshness that very few could genuinely maintain. But for the poor, there was no faking. What you saw was what you got. Their bodies were shaped by their labor, their skin by the elements, their clothing by necessity. Their beauty, if it was acknowledged at all, was a robust, earthy kind of beauty, a testament to resilience and hardiness, far removed from the delicate, almost fragile ideal championed by the aristocracy. This stark contrast wasn't just about appearance. It was a profound social statement. To look beautiful by medieval standards was to broadcast your wealth, your leisure, and your exemption from physical labor. Your pale skin declared you hadn't worked in the sun. Your delicate hands announced you hadn't toiled in the fields. Your elaborate clothes screamed that you could afford to waste precious fabric on mere ornamentation. It was the ultimate flex, a quiet luxury that was actually very loud in its implications. The availability of medical and cosmetic knowledge also varied dramatically. while the wealthy might consult apothecaries or even physicians, however misguided their advice might be. For beauty remedies, the common folk relied on folk wisdom, often passed down through generations or simple, readily available ingredients. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some poorer communities might have used unusual local plants or even animal byproducts for rudimentary beauty treatments, like rubbing certain herbs on their skin for perceived benefits, or using stale urine as a cleaning agent for clothes or even teeth, a practice not exclusive to the poor, but certainly more a necessity for them. The efficacy of these methods, of course, was highly dubious, and some could be outright harmful. Historians still argue whether the extreme beauty standards of the court truly trickled down to the lower classes, or if they simply maintained their own, more practical aesthetic values. Did the peasant woman genuinely aspire to the pallor and elongated forehead of the noble lady she glimpsed from afar, or did she simply admire the lady's fine clothes and then return to her own world, where a strong back and healthy children were the true markers of worth? It's a fascinating question, isn't it? The consensus leans towards the idea that while the ideals were known, the aspiration to achieve them was largely impractical and often abandoned due to the sheer demands of survival. The psychological toll we discussed earlier, the pressure to conform, was undoubtedly amplified by class divisions. For the noblewoman, the pressure to embody these ideals was immense. Her beauty could enhance her marriage prospects, her social standing, and her family's reputation. Failure to conform, particularly for women, could lead to social ostracization or a perceived lack of worth. She was, in many ways, a living billboard for her family's status. But for the common person, the pressure was different. It wasn't about achieving the ideal, but about the constant, inescapable reminder that they couldn't. Every glimpse of a richly dressed noble, every story of courtly beauty, would have reinforced their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. It was a subtle, pervasive form of psychological scar, a constant affirmation of their lack of privilege. Imagine being told, implicitly or explicitly, that your natural appearance, shaped by an honest day's work, was fundamentally unbeautiful according to the prevailing standards. It's a heavy thought, isn't it? Even access to basic hygiene, which profoundly impacted appearance, was dictated by class. The wealthy could afford more frequent baths, scented soaps, and clean linens. While medieval hygiene was far from modern standards for anyone, the poor often had even less access to clean water, soap, or fresh clothing. This meant body odor, skin conditions, and dental issues were often more pronounced among the lower classes, further distancing them from the clean, pure ideal of the elite. It's a grim reality, but one that undeniably shaped how people looked and how they were perceived. So, as you slowly drift off, consider this: medieval beauty was less about innate attractiveness and more about an extravagant display of wealth and leisure. It was a gilded cage for the rich, forcing them into painful and often dangerous practices to maintain an illusion. But for the poor, it was an impenetrable wall, a constant, visual reminder of their lot in life, and a standard that was not just brutal and impossible, but utterly irrelevant to their daily struggle for survival. The ability to pursue beauty, or even to fake it convincingly, was perhaps the greatest privilege of all. And so, as the twilight deepens and the last embers of our medieval journey glow softly, we turn our gaze from the pressures on women to the equally, though differently, demanding world of medieval masculine ideals. You might imagine that men, free from corsets and lead-based powders, had it easier. Ah, my dear listener, if only. Their beauty standards, while less focused on ethereal fragility, were a brutal gauntlet of their own, often split down two distinct, yet equally unforgiving paths: the rugged knightly ideal versus the refined courtly gentleman. Picture it, if you will, a medieval dating app where you'd have to swipe right on either a battle-hardened warrior or a lute-playing poet, each with their own very specific and very high expectations. First, let's consider the knightly ideal, the archetype that probably leaps to mind when you picture the Middle Ages. This was a man forged in the crucible of war. His beauty not in delicate features but in raw, undeniable strength and martial prowess. You picture him, don't you? Broad-shouldered, powerful limbs, a physique honed by endless hours of training in swordplay, jousting, and horsemanship. His body was a weapon, a shield, and a testament to his ability to protect his lands, his lord, and his lady. This wasn't about looking good in a selfie. It was about surviving a siege. For the knight, the signs of a life lived hard were often considered honorable. Scars, for instance, were not blemishes to be hidden, but rather badges of courage, a visible resume of battles fought and survived. Imagine a knight returning from campaign, a fresh scar tracing its way across his cheek. While a medieval lady would be frantically reaching for her mercury-based concealer, our knight would likely wear it with a quiet pride, perhaps even exaggerating the tale of its acquisition over a tankard of ale. His skin, rather than being unnaturally pale, would be weathered and tanned from long days under the sun, riding across windswept plains or standing guard on chilly ramparts. He wouldn't be worried about a glowing complexion. He'd be worried about getting an arrow to the face. Hair for the knight was typically practical, often cut to a manageable length that wouldn't get tangled in a helmet or obscure his vision during a skirmish. It was rarely elaborately styled. And beards? Oh, the beards! It's a mainstream historical fact that for much of the medieval period, particularly among the warrior class, a full beard was a powerful symbol of masculinity, virility, and wisdom. Think of the formidable Viking warriors whose influence certainly lingered. A flowing beard offered warmth, a bit of protection, and an undeniable air of gravitas. For a knight, a clean-shaven face might even suggest a lack of maturity or a monastic vow, neither of which were particularly appealing traits for a man of arms. So, while your modern-day lumberjack might cultivate his beard for aesthetics, the medieval knight's beard was an extension of his rugged, ready-for-anything persona. You wouldn't catch him asking if his beard oil was organic, would you? He'd probably just rub some leftover boar grease in it and call it a day. His clothing, too, reflected this functional ideal. Layers of practical tunics, sturdy breeches, and, of course, the heavy, cumbersome armor that was his second skin. While there might be some decorative elements for display, a heraldic device on his surcoat, perhaps the primary concern was protection and utility. You wouldn't see a knight fretting over whether his doublet perfectly matched his hose when he was about to charge into battle. He was too busy making sure his gorget wasn't pinching. The demands on this man were immense. Constant physical training, enduring brutal conditions, facing injury and death with unwavering courage. His beauty was in his capability, his resilience, and his sheer, unyielding will. The clang of his armor, the scent of sweat and leather, the grim determination in his eyes, these were his defining features. Now, let us gently pivot, like a courtier gracefully executing a dance step, to the second, equally demanding masculine ideal, the courtly gentleman. If the knight was a blunt instrument, the courtier was a finely sharpened rapier, precise, elegant, and deadly in a different way. This ideal flourished in the opulent halls of castles and palaces, where wit, charm, and refinement were as crucial as martial skill, sometimes even more so. The courtly gentleman's physique, while still healthy, wasn't about brute strength. It was about grace, agility, and a certain slender elegance. He might not be built to wield a two-handed sword for hours, but he could certainly dance all night, perform a complicated falconry maneuver, or ride a horse with exquisite poise. His beauty was in his cultivated appearance, his social graces, and his intellectual prowess. Think less mountain man and more metropolitan sophisticate. His grooming habits were a stark contrast to the knight's ruggedness. Cleanliness, for one, was highly valued, as much as was achievable in medieval times. While daily baths were still a luxury, courtly men would certainly make an effort to be clean, using perfumed oils and waters to mask body odor, much like their female counterparts. Their skin, while not necessarily deathly pale, would aim for an unblemished look, suggesting a life free from manual labor and exposure to the elements. You wouldn't want a sun-weathered face at court. It might imply you'd spent too much time outside, perhaps even working, which was decidedly uncourtly. A quirky tidbit is that some courtly gentlemen, particularly those influenced by classical Roman ideals of smooth skin, might have even plucked or shaved their facial hair to achieve a completely clean-shaven look, though this was less widespread than for women. Imagine the medieval equivalent of waxing your chest, but for your face just to look perfectly smooth for the duchess. Hair for the courtier was often meticulously styled, perhaps curled with tongs, carefully coiffed, or cut to frame the face. It was a statement, an accessory, not just something to keep out of your eyes during a joust. Beards, if worn, would be neatly trimmed and manicured, a far cry from the knight's untamed growth. Often, a clean-shaven face was preferred, allowing the delicate features and refined complexion to shine through. He was less concerned with looking like a grizzly bear and more with looking like a porcelain doll, albeit a very dashing, well-dressed porcelain doll. And his clothing. Oh, the fabrics. Rich silks, velvets, brocades, often in vibrant, expensive dyes, tailored to perfection to show off his refined figure. Furs, intricate embroidery, and glittering jewels adorned his garments, all screaming wealth, status, and an utter lack of concern for practicality. This was a man who didn't get his clothes dirty because he didn't do dirty things. He spent his days composing poetry, playing chess, engaging in witty banter, practicing his lute, or perhaps engaging in a polite, rather than brutal, form of hunting. The rustle of his silk doublet, the subtle scent of imported perfumes, the soft murmur of courtly conversation, these were his sensory world. The demands on him were intellectual and social, mastering complex etiquette, demonstrating wit, intelligence, and charm, and navigating the treacherous waters of courtly politics without making a single social misstep. His beauty was in his cultivation, his grace, and his ability to command respect through his presence and intellect. So, you see, both ideals were equally demanding, just in different arenas. The knight faced the brutal physical demands of survival and combat, his body a tool of war. The courtier faced the brutal social and intellectual demands of court life, his mind and manners his weapons. One embraced the marks of hardship. The other sought to mask any imperfections, presenting a polished, flawless facade. It's almost like the medieval version of gym bro versus tech bro, each with their own rigorous, often uncomfortable, daily routines to maintain their chosen aesthetic. Historians still debate whether the courtly ideal truly softened the male image or simply shifted the focus of masculine hardness from physical prowess to mental and social dominance. Was it progress, or just a different kind of cage? There was certainly overlap. A knight might be expected to have some courtly manners, and a courtier might need to know how to handle a sword if called upon. But the primary emphasis, the aspirational ideal, was distinct. The pressure on these men was immense. Failure to embody the knightly ideal could mean a loss of honor, a reputation for cowardice, or even death in battle. Failure to embody the courtly ideal could mean social ostracization, a loss of influence, or a life spent on the fringes of power. Imagine the constant performance, the relentless striving to measure up, whether you were enduring a freezing vigil on a battlements or trying to outwit a rival in a game of chess while simultaneously charming the queen. Just like for women, these medieval masculine ideals were not just aspirational. They were a source of constant pressure, discomfort, and often profound psychological strain. The Middle Ages, it seems, spared no one from its brutal beauty standards. Now, let's drift a little further into the less glamorous, more ouchy side of medieval beauty. You've heard about the ideals, the bizarre methods, but what about the sheer, unadulterated discomfort? Imagine waking up each day knowing your pursuit of perfection would involve a consistent, dull ache, a sharp sting, or a suffocating squeeze. Because that, my dear listener, was the daily reality for many who dared to chase the era's impossible beauty standards. It wasn't just about looking good. It was about enduring for the sake of looking good. Let's start with that prized, elongated forehead. Shall we? You remember the one, high and smooth, almost egg-like in its pristine curve. Achieving this involved a rigorous daily ritual of hair removal, and it was far from a spa day. First, there was the plucking. Not just a stray eyebrow hair here or there, but the entire brow, meticulously, agonizingly, pulled from its follicle. And then the hairline. Oh, the hairline. To push it back, to reveal more of that coveted forehead. Women would pluck individual hairs, one by one, along their temples and across their foreheads. Can you feel that tiny tug, multiplied by hundreds? The stinging sensation, the redness that followed, the bumps of irritated skin? It was a constant battle against nature, and nature, as you know, tends to fight back with gusto. But plucking was just the beginning. For a truly smooth, unblemished surface, some resorted to shaving. Picture a medieval razor, not your sleek, multi-bladed wonder, but a crude, often dull piece of sharpened metal. The nicks, the cuts, the inevitable razor burn on delicate facial skin, all while trying to avoid infection in an era with limited understanding of hygiene. And then the rapid regrowth, forcing you to repeat the painful process, sometimes daily. It was like trying to maintain a pristine lawn with a pair of rusty shears and a stubborn weed problem. Then came the more assertive methods, chemical depilatories, concocted from rather alarming ingredients like quicklime, arsenic, or even cat dung mixed with vinegar. Just imagine applying a paste made of that to your face. The instant burning sensation, the raw, angry redness, the blistering. This wasn't just discomfort. It was a deliberate chemical attack on your skin, all for the sake of a temporarily hairless forehead. You might achieve that smooth, luminous look for a few hours, but at what cost? A face that felt like it had been held too close to a roaring fire, perpetually irritated, perpetually recovering. It was the ultimate beauty is pain mantra, taken to terrifying extremes. Moving down to that ghostly pallor, the complexion that whispered of delicate health and noble leisure. While we discussed the dangerous ingredients in previous sections, let's focus on the feeling of it. Applying lead-based white paint to your face day after day wasn't just about looking pale. It was about feeling a heavy, suffocating layer on your skin, clogging your pores, preventing it from breathing. The subtle itching, the eventual development of rashes, the dry, flaking patches that would appear as your skin protested this chemical assault. It wasn't a glow. It was a slow, deliberate dulling of your natural vitality. And for those who took it a step further with practices like bloodletting to achieve an even more ethereal, almost sickly pallor, well, that brought its own set of discomforts. The dizzy spells, the weakness, the lingering fatigue from deliberately draining your own life force. You might look beautifully frail, but you'd feel anything but beautiful. Now, let's talk about that slender silhouette, that elongated torso that seemed to defy the natural curves of the human body. This is where corsetry, in its nascent medieval forms, truly began to exert its tyrannical grip. While not the rigid, bone-crushing corsets of later centuries, early forms of lacing and stiffened bodices were still designed to compress and reshape. You would be laced into garments that restricted your diaphragm, making every breath a conscious effort. Forget deep, satisfying gulps of air. You were confined to shallow, polite sips. This constant compression led to a litany of internal discomforts. Indigestion became a common companion, as your stomach was squeezed and pushed into unnatural positions. Your lungs, perpetually squashed, struggled to expand fully, leading to shortness of breath, lightheadedness, and even fainting spells. It wasn't uncommon for ladies to swoon during courtly events, often attributed to their delicate sensibilities, but more likely a direct result of their constricted breathing and lack of oxygen. It was a vicious cycle. You fainted because of your beauty regimen, and your fainting was then considered a sign of your refined beauty. Oh, how terribly elegant to be oxygen-deprived. Mainstream historical fact asterisk, it is well documented that early forms of corsetry, even those less rigid than their Victorian descendants, caused significant physical discomfort including restricted breathing, indigestion, and the displacement of internal organs, leading to various health complaints among medieval women. Imagine trying to eat a hearty medieval feast, all that roasted meat and heavy bread, while feeling like your stomach was trying to escape your ribcage. It's a miracle anyone enjoyed their dinner. The constant pressure on your ribs and spine could lead to chronic back pain, as your muscles, no longer needed to support your torso, would weaken. It was a daily battle against your own anatomy, forcing it into an unnatural, elongated line. And the fabric itself, often stiff and unyielding, would chafe against your skin, leaving red marks and irritation, especially in warmer weather. You moved with a cautious stiffness, every gesture a deliberate effort, not a fluid motion. And then there's the hair, or rather, the lack of visible hair. For women, hair was often concealed beneath wimples, veils, and elaborate headwear. While this might sound innocuous, imagine the constant pressure on your scalp, The tension headaches from hair pulled back so tightly it felt like it was trying to escape your head, and the sheer heat generated by layers of fabric wrapped around your head, especially during long summer days or indoors by a roaring fire. It was like wearing a perpetual, slightly too tight hat, designed to give you a headache by noon. Let's not forget the feet. Oh, the poor, neglected feet. While not always directly related to beauty standards in the same way as the face or torso, medieval footwear certainly contributed to daily discomfort. Those long, pointed shoes, known as polaines, which could extend many inches beyond the toes, were a fashion statement that came with a price. Quirky or fringe tidbit asterisk in some periods. Polaines became so ridiculously long that men and women had to stuff the tips with moss or baleen, or even tie them to their knees with string to prevent tripping. Imagine trying to navigate muddy, uneven medieval streets, or even just climb a flight of stairs with what amounted to two small canoes strapped to your feet. Bunions, corns, hammer toes, ingrown toenails. These were not just modern ailments. They were the painful souvenirs of fashionable medieval footwear. Every step was a careful calculation, every slight misstep a potential tumble. And the general state of hygiene, or lack thereof, contributed its own layer of discomfort. While we'll delve deeper into hygiene later, consider the constant itch of unwashed skin, the minor rashes, the small sores that would fester without proper care. The discomfort of body odor, both your own and others, was a constant sensory assault, making social interactions less about pleasantries and more about enduring the olfactory landscape. Dental pain from untreated cavities and gum disease would have been a common, debilitating experience, made worse by the crude and often ineffective remedies of the time. Imagine trying to maintain a serene, beautiful expression when your tooth feels like it's trying to stage a rebellion. This constant state of low-level physical discomfort contributed significantly to the mental toll, but we'll get to that. For now, just consider the sheer persistence of it. It wasn't a one-off procedure. It was a daily grind. Every morning, you'd embark on a routine that promised pain, constriction, and irritation. Every evening, you'd unlace, unwrap, and unpaint, only to find your body marked by the day's efforts, red welts, aching muscles, irritated skin. Historians still argue whether the immediate, visible pain from these practices, like a rash from lead makeup, was seen as a necessary, almost noble sacrifice for beauty, or if the deeper, systemic issues, like lead poisoning, were simply ignored or misunderstood as unrelated ailments. Was it a conscious trade-off, or a slow, insidious poisoning that went unnoticed for decades? Regardless, the daily physical toll was undeniable. So, as you drift off, imagine living in an age where perfection wasn't just an ideal, but a daily regimen of mild torture. Where looking ethereal meant feeling perpetually uncomfortable. Where the phrase beauty is pain wasn't a cliché, but a lived, breathed, and often painful reality. It was a world where you literally suffered for your art, or rather, for your appearance. And that, my dear listener, is a discomfort that echoes through time. Now, let's drift a little further into the less glamorous, more ouchy side of medieval beauty. You've heard about the ideals, the bizarre methods, but what about the sheer, unadulterated discomfort? Imagine waking up each day knowing your pursuit of perfection would involve a consistent, dull ache, a sharp sting, or a suffocating squeeze. Because that, my dear listener, was the daily reality for many who dared to chase the era's impossible beauty standards. It wasn't just about looking good. It was about enduring for the sake of looking good. Let's start with that prized, elongated forehead. Shall we? You remember the one, high and smooth, almost egg-like in its pristine curve. Achieving this involved a rigorous daily ritual of hair removal, and it was far from a spa day. First, there was the plucking. Not just a stray eyebrow hair here or there, but the entire brow, meticulously, agonizingly, pulled from its follicle. And then the hairline. Oh, the hairline. To push it back, to reveal more of that coveted forehead. Women would pluck individual hairs, one by one, along their temples and across their foreheads. Can you feel that tiny tug, multiplied by hundreds? The stinging sensation, the redness that followed, the bumps of irritated skin? It was a constant battle against nature, and nature, as you know, tends to fight back with gusto. But plucking was just the beginning. For a truly smooth, unblemished surface, some resorted to shaving. Picture a medieval razor, not your sleek, multi-bladed wonder, but a crude, often dull piece of sharpened metal. The nicks, the cuts, the inevitable razor burn on delicate facial skin, all while trying to avoid infection in an era with limited understanding of hygiene. And then the rapid regrowth, forcing you to repeat the painful process, sometimes daily. It was like trying to maintain a pristine lawn with a pair of rusty shears and a stubborn weed problem. Then came the more assertive methods, chemical depilatories, concocted from rather alarming ingredients like quicklime, arsenic, or even cat dung mixed with vinegar. Just imagine applying a paste made of that to your face. The instant burning sensation, the raw, angry redness, the blistering. This wasn't just discomfort. It was a deliberate chemical attack on your skin, all for the sake of a temporarily hairless forehead. You might achieve that smooth, luminous look for a few hours, but at what cost? A face that felt like it had been held too close to a roaring fire, perpetually irritated, perpetually recovering. It was the ultimate beauty is pain mantra, taken to terrifying extremes. Moving down to that ghostly pallor, the complexion that whispered of delicate health and noble leisure. While we discussed the dangerous ingredients in previous sections, let's focus on the feeling of it. Applying lead-based white paint to your face day after day wasn't just about looking pale. It was about feeling a heavy, suffocating layer on your skin, clogging your pores, preventing it from breathing. The subtle itching, the eventual development of rashes, the dry, flaking patches that would appear as your skin protested this chemical assault. It wasn't a glow. It was a slow, deliberate dulling of your natural vitality. And for those who took it a step further with practices like bloodletting to achieve an even more ethereal, almost sickly pallor, well, that brought its own set of discomforts. The dizzy spells, the weakness, the lingering fatigue from deliberately draining your own life force. You might look beautifully frail, but you'd feel anything but beautiful. You're drifting deeper now, past the rigid corsets and the hidden hair, into a realm where beauty wasn't just about discomfort, but outright danger. Imagine, if you will, the soft, flickering light of a medieval workshop, not for crafting armor or weaving tapestries, but for concocting something far more insidious: cosmetics. These weren't your gentle, plant-based serums, friend, but rather a veritable witch's brew of bizarre, often deadly ingredients, all mixed with the best intentions and the worst possible scientific understanding. Picture this scene. A woman, perhaps a lady of the court, or a diligent servant, meticulously preparing her face for the day. But her beauty kit isn't filled with the delightful aromas of modern skincare. Instead, you might catch a faint, metallic tang, or a sharp, acrid whiff. You see her reaching for a small pot of white paste, its texture smooth and inviting, like a freshly churned butter. This, my dear listener, is likely ceruse. Now, ceruse is a mainstream historical fact that sends shivers down your spine when you truly grasp its nature. It's lead carbonate, a heavy metal compound, ground into a fine powder and mixed with vinegar or oil to create a thick, opaque foundation. Its purpose? To achieve that coveted, deathly pallor we've discussed. A complexion so pale it bordered on translucent, signifying a life of leisure, untouched by the sun's harsh rays or the grime of manual labor. You apply it generously, painting over your natural skin tone, creating a mask of artificial purity. And for a while, it works. Your skin gleams like alabaster, catching the candlelight just so, making you appear delicate, ethereal, almost divine. The initial results were probably quite striking, giving that porcelain doll look that was so highly prized. You could almost hear the collective gasp of admiration at court. But here's the grim punchline. Lead is a neurotoxin. As you wore this lovely, lustrous mask day after day, week after week, the lead slowly, insidiously, leached into your skin, entering your bloodstream. Initially, you might notice your skin drying out, becoming flaky, perhaps even developing a grayish tint beneath the ceruse. That ethereal glow? It was slowly replaced by a dull, leaden hue as your body reacted to the poison. Then came the more severe symptoms: Headaches, muscle pain, digestive issues. Your hair might start to fall out in clumps, your teeth could loosen and blacken, and your gums might recede, revealing an alarming blue line. And that wasn't even the worst of it. Long-term exposure could lead to organ damage, cognitive decline, seizures, and even madness. Imagine staring into a mirror, your hands trembling, your mind foggy, knowing that the very substance you used to enhance your beauty was slowly, systematically, destroying you from the inside out. It's like buying a fabulous new car that runs on a fuel designed to slowly dissolve the engine. A real head-scratcher, isn't it? And Saruz wasn't the only villain in this cosmetic tragedy. To achieve those wide, sparkling eyes that mimicked innocence and piety, women would often turn to a plant called belladonna, or deadly nightshade. A few drops of its extract, carefully placed into the eyes, would cause the pupils to dilate dramatically, giving the user a wide-eyed, almost hypnotic gaze. The name belladonna itself means beautiful lady in Italian, a chilling irony given its toxicity. You'd feel a slight burning sensation, perhaps a temporary blurring of your vision. But then, poof, your pupils would expand, making your eyes appear darker, deeper, more alluring. The immediate effect was undeniably striking. Your eyes would seem larger, more captivating, framed by those carefully plucked brows. But belladonna is a potent poison. Regular use could lead to blurred vision, light sensitivity, and even permanent blindness. It also affects the nervous system, potentially causing hallucinations, delirium, and heart problems. So, while you might have captivated a suitor with your enchanting gaze, you might also have been stumbling through the castle halls, seeing phantom knights and dragons, all while slowly losing your sight. Talk about a high-stakes beauty gamble. And what about blemishes, freckles, or the dreaded acne? The medieval answer often involved mercury. Yes, the same mercury that's a liquid metal at room temperature, the same mercury that causes neurological damage and insanity. It was believed to have purifying properties, able to draw out impurities from the skin. You might find it in various creams and salves, sometimes mixed with sulfur or other harsh chemicals. Applying these concoctions, you'd initially notice your skin peeling, perhaps even an improvement in texture as the top layer sloughed off. But beneath that temporary veneer of smoothness, the mercury was doing its slow, deadly work. Could cause severe skin irritation, discoloration, kidney damage, tremors, and again, neurological issues. So you might banish a pesky pimple, only to develop a persistent tremor in your hand that made it impossible to hold your chalice steady. A truly elegant solution, wouldn't you say? The pursuit of the perfect smile also led to some truly bizarre and unhygienic practices. Forget your minty fresh toothpaste and electric brushes. Medieval teeth cleaning was different. For a quirky or fringe tidbit, consider this. Some medieval beauty recipes for teeth whitening included the use of urine. Yes, you heard that right. Urine, particularly aged urine, contains ammonia, which is a powerful cleaning agent. The idea was that the ammonia would whiten teeth and kill bacteria. So you might rinse your mouth with a cup of your own, or perhaps a child's aged urine in the morning. The smell alone would be enough to make you reconsider, but the belief in its efficacy was strong. You'd swish it around, perhaps even scrub with a rough cloth or a twig, hoping for a pearly white smile. While the ammonia might have offered some superficial cleaning, the overall impact on dental hygiene was likely negligible, and the taste, well, let's just say it wasn't minty fresh. It makes you truly appreciate modern dentistry, doesn't it? Suddenly, a little fluoride doesn't seem so bad. Hair was another area ripe for dangerous experimentation. While women often covered their hair, it was still a symbol of status and beauty. Long, lustrous hair was desired, and specific colors were fashionable. To lighten hair, concoctions involving saffron, alum, and even lye, a caustic alkali, were used. Imagine applying a corrosive chemical to your scalp, hoping for a golden glow, but risking severe burns and hair loss. To darken hair, medieval people might turn to ingredients like black lead, iron filings mixed with vinegar, or even leeches, whose blood was thought to darken the hair and add luster. The sheer bravery, or perhaps desperation, To apply such potent and unproven substances to your delicate scalp is truly remarkable. Beyond the specific ingredients, there was a broader, more mystical approach to beauty in the medieval era, heavily influenced by alchemy and folk medicine. Alchemists, those proto-scientists of the age, weren't just searching for the philosopher's stone or the elixir of life. They were also dabbling in the creation of perfection through various distillation and purification processes. Their pursuit of transforming base metals into gold sometimes overlapped with the idea of transforming a flawed human body into an ideal one. You might find recipes in their tomes for waters of beauty or elixirs for youth, often involving complex distillation of herbs, minerals, and even animal parts. The scientific understanding was rudimentary at best, a blend of observation, superstition, and wishful thinking. Think about the preparation involved. The grinding of powders with a stone mortar and pestle, the careful measuring, or lack thereof, of dubious liquids, the simmering over an open fire, the pungent smells filling the air. You might be told to collect morning dew from specific plants, or to grind pearls into a fine powder, believing their luminescence would transfer to your skin. Some recipes called for bizarre animal ingredients: crushed insects, dried animal blood, even dung. The belief was often rooted in sympathetic magic. If something possessed a quality you desired, incorporating it into a remedy would transfer that quality to you. So, if a deer was graceful, perhaps a potion made from its antlers would bestow grace. If a pearl was lustrous, grinding it into a face cream would make your skin glow. It's a logic that, from our modern perspective, seems utterly bonkers, but in a world where disease was a mystery and superstition was rampant, it made a strange kind of sense. And the application itself was often a ritual. These weren't quick spritzes or dabs. You might be instructed to apply a poultice to your face overnight, or to soak in a bath infused with specific herbs and minerals for hours. The discomfort was a given and accepted part of the process. After all, beauty often required suffering, as we've already seen. The burning sensation from a lye-based hair lightener, the itching from a mercury salve, the nausea from ingesting a dubious beauty tonic. These were simply part of the journey to perfection. It's tempting to look back and scoff at their ignorance, but remember the context. Medical knowledge was extremely limited. The concept of germ theory was centuries away. Diseases were often attributed to imbalances of humors, divine punishment, or evil spirits. If you developed a rash after using a mercury cream, it might be blamed on a bad humor or a curse, not the toxic substance you applied. There was no FDA, no consumer protection agencies, no understanding of chemical toxicity. Recipes were passed down through generations, often embellished or altered, with little to no scientific testing. Historians still argue whether the common person truly understood the long-term toxicity of these concoctions, or if they simply attributed their ailments to other causes like divine displeasure or bad humors. While some physicians of the time, often educated in Arab or Greek medical traditions, might have been aware of the dangers of certain substances like lead or mercury, this knowledge was far from widespread. For most, the immediate, visible results of these cures outweighed any vague, poorly understood risks. If your skin cleared up, even temporarily, or your eyes sparkled, the short-term gain seemed worth it. The long-term suffering was often disconnected from its cause, a cruel twist of fate in a world that lacked the tools for scientific inquiry. So, as you drift off, consider the immense vulnerability of medieval individuals. They lived in a world where the pursuit of beauty was not just about superficial appearance, but about social standing, marriage prospects, and even spiritual purity. And in that desperate pursuit, they were willing to expose themselves to substances that, in any modern context, would come with a biohazard warning. The irony, of course, is that these cures often led to disfigurement, chronic illness, and premature death, turning the quest for beauty into a slow, agonizing form of self-destruction. A truly brutal and impossible standard, indeed, made all the more so by the very remedies meant to achieve it. You settle deeper into your pillow, the faint echoes of poisoned pallor and torso torture still swirling in your mind. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? This relentless pursuit of an impossible ideal. But now, let's drift back to a time when, perhaps, the pressure wasn't quite so suffocating. a fleeting moment of grace before the full weight of medieval beauty standards descended. We're talking about childhood. Imagine, if you will, a small, grubby hand reaching for a wooden doll, or perhaps a tiny, mud-splattered foot chasing a piglet in the yard. This is the medieval child, and for a precious, albeit brief, period, they were largely spared the most brutal and demanding aspects of adult beauty culture. You see them running free, their hair often unkempt, their faces smudged with dirt or berry juice. There's a certain wildness, an untamed quality to their appearance that would be utterly scandalous for an adult woman, or even a man of status. Their clothes are simpler, designed for practicality and warmth rather than rigid adherence to fashion. Think loose tunics, rough woolen hose, perhaps a simple coif for the girls. No elaborate lacing, no restrictive boning, no heavy veils. It's almost liberating. For the youngest children, especially those before the age of 7, a common threshold in medieval thought, often marking the end of infancy, the focus was primarily on survival and basic upbringing. You won't find tiny tots being laced into miniature corsets or having their foreheads plucked. The sheer impracticality, not to mention the high rates of infant and child mortality, meant that simply keeping a child alive and healthy was the paramount concern. A plump, rosy-cheeked child was a sign of health and prosperity, a stark contrast to the ethereal pallor coveted by adults. It's like their parents were silently cheering, "Yes, you're still breathing and eating. Good job, tiny human." Which, honestly, is a pretty low bar, but a welcome one in a world where survival was a daily gamble. This period of relative freedom wasn't necessarily born of enlightened views on child-rearing, but more out of necessity and a different understanding of childhood itself. Children were seen as miniature adults, yes, but also as beings in a state of development, not yet fully formed. Their natural state was more accepted. You wouldn't expect a sapling to bear fruit like a mature tree, right? Similarly, a child wasn't expected to embody the full, elaborate, and often painful beauty ideals of an adult. Their beauty was in their innocence, their potential, and their health. Yet this respite was, as the name suggests, brief. As a child approached adolescence, particularly from the age of 7 onwards, the subtle pressures began to mount, like a slow, creeping vine. For girls, especially those from noble or wealthy families, the preparation for their future roles as wives and mothers, or perhaps as nuns, became more pronounced. You start to see them being taught the arts of embroidery, needlework, household management, and perhaps a smattering of reading or writing. These skills, while not directly about beauty, were essential for presenting a desirable image in the marriage market. A well-managed household reflected well on the lady, and by extension, on her family. It was a kind of indirect beauty, a beauty of competence and order. You might also observe the gradual introduction of more structured clothing. While not as extreme as adult garments, young girls might begin to wear more fitted bodices or have their hair styled in simple braids, perhaps covered with a coif or a rudimentary veil as they neared puberty. It's a gentle easing into the restrictive world of adult fashion, like a warm-up stretch before a particularly grueling yoga session. No sudden shock to the system, just a slow, steady tightening. And then there's the grooming. While children weren't typically slathered in lead-based foundation, basic hygiene was still taught, albeit within the grim realities of medieval life. You'd be encouraged to wash your hands and face, perhaps to comb your hair. For noble children, there might be early lessons in deportment, how to sit, how to walk, how to curtsy or bow. These weren't about achieving a specific facial feature, but about presenting an overall image of grace and refinement. Imagine a medieval etiquette coach, gently reminding you not to pick your nose at the dinner table or to keep your back straight. It's a bit like being told to sit up straight by your grandma, but with the added pressure of potentially securing a favorable marriage alliance. For boys, the preparation was equally rigorous, though focused on different ideals. They were trained in martial arts, horsemanship, and the codes of chivalry. A strong, capable body was paramount, and while they weren't striving for the elongated, slender torso of the courtly lover, they were certainly expected to be fit and robust. Their hair might be cut in a practical style, their clothes sturdy and functional. The beauty ideal for a boy wasn't about delicate features, but about strength, courage, and a commanding presence. You wouldn't want your future knight to look like he'd been plucked from a lily patch, would you? One mainstream historical fact that underscores this period is the widespread practice of sending children, especially from noble families, to live in other households as pages, squires, or ladies-in-waiting from a relatively young age, often between 7 and 14. This wasn't just about fostering political alliances. It was a practical education in manners, social graces, and the specific skills required for their future adult roles. It was an apprenticeship in becoming a proper medieval adult, beauty standards and all. You learned by observation, by imitation, and by gentle or not-so-gentle correction. Now, for a quirky tidbit, did you know that medieval children often played with miniature versions of adult tools and household items? Tiny plows, tiny spinning wheels, tiny swords. It wasn't just for fun. It was a form of play that subtly reinforced gender roles and prepared them for their adult responsibilities. It's like a medieval version of a toy kitchen, but instead of plastic food, you're pretending to churn butter or stab a dummy knight. Practicality mixed with play, preparing them for a life where even their appearance would be a tool. But let's be clear, while the direct application of extreme beauty rituals might have been deferred, the underlying pressure was always there, simmering. Children were constantly exposed to the adult world, where beauty, status, and piety were inextricably linked. They saw their mothers and elder sisters enduring the plucking, the lacing, the dangerous cosmetics. They heard the whispers about who was considered beautiful, who was not, and the implications of those judgments. It's like growing up in a house where everyone is constantly dieting and talking about their weight. Even if you're allowed to eat cake, the message still sinks in. The psychological scars, which we'll touch upon more deeply later, weren't necessarily immediate for children, but the seeds were certainly planted. You internalize what is valued, what is praised. A child might not understand why their mother is plucking her hairline, but they understand that it's something grown-up women do to be considered attractive. They learn that certain physical traits are desirable and others are not. This subtle conditioning is perhaps even more insidious than direct pressure, because it becomes part of their worldview before they even have the chance to question it. Historians still argue whether medieval childhood was truly a distinct phase of life, or if children were simply considered small adults. While they might not have had the same recreational activities as modern children, it's clear they weren't immediately subjected to the full brunt of adult beauty expectations. However, the preparation for those expectations was undeniable. A slow, steady immersion into a world where appearance was often destiny. The respite was less a vacation and more a brief, calm stretch before the rapids. As a child grew, the lines blurred. A young girl, perhaps on the cusp of puberty, might start to feel the tug of her hair being pulled back more tightly, or the slight constriction of a new, more fitted gown. The ideals of the high forehead, the pale skin, the slender silhouette, began to transition from abstract concepts observed in adults to concrete expectations applied to them. You might even see young noblewomen being taught specific beauty routines, albeit gentler ones, such as using rosewater for skin or herbal rinses for hair. It's a bit like moving from playing dress-up with your mom's clothes to having to actually wear uncomfortable formal wear for a family event. The fun quickly fades. And what about the less privileged children? For peasant children, beauty ideals were often secondary to practicality and health. A strong, able body, capable of manual labor, was the primary beauty. Yet, even here, societal norms played a role. A healthy, robust appearance was still valued, and deformities or obvious physical ailments might carry social stigma. You wouldn't find them applying lead paint, but a child with a clear complexion and strong teeth, if they were lucky enough to have them, would still be considered more comely in their own sphere. Their beauty regimen might involve simply not starving and avoiding disease, which, let's be honest, was a full-time job. So, while you weren't likely to see a medieval toddler with a shaved hairline or a face powdered with mercury, the journey towards those brutal adult beauty standards began early. It was a gradual initiation, a slow tightening of the invisible chains of expectation. The freedom of early childhood was a precious, fleeting gift, soon replaced by the relentless pursuit of an ideal that was, for most, utterly unattainable. You can almost hear the soft sigh of relief from those little ones, before the world of plucking and poisoning began to demand its due. You've heard the whispers of discomfort, the grim accounts of physical pain, the sheer agony endured in the relentless pursuit of medieval beauty. But now, as the flickering lamplight casts long shadows on the wall, let's delve into the deepest, most insidious wounds of all, the psychological scars. Because while a broken bone heals and a burn eventually fades, the constant, gnawing anxiety of never being enough leaves a far more profound and lasting mark. Imagine, if you will, waking each morning in your straw-filled bed, not with thoughts of the day's tasks or the warmth of the sun, but with an immediate, suffocating dread. You don't have a full-length mirror, of course, but you have your reflection in a polished silver disc, or perhaps just the still surface of a basin of water. And what you see, or what you think you see, is a constant, crushing disappointment. Is your forehead high enough? Is that wisp of hair visible beneath your wimple? Are your lips just the right shade of pale? You scrutinize every inch of your face, every curve of your body, seeking out the flaws that medieval society has so ruthlessly taught you to abhor. It's a self-inflicted torture, a daily ritual of inadequacy. The pressure is immense, a suffocating blanket woven from societal expectations, family hopes, and the ever-present, watchful eyes of your community. For a medieval woman, your appearance wasn't just about personal vanity. It was often intrinsically tied to your very future. It's a mainstream historical fact that for many women, particularly those of the nobility and burgeoning merchant classes, securing a good marriage was the primary path to social and economic security, and your perceived beauty and adherence to these brutal ideals played an undeniably significant role in securing a desirable match. Your family might subtly, or not so subtly, nudge you towards certain practices, reminding you of the importance of a clear complexion for your dowry, or a high forehead for attracting a suitable lord. You are, in essence, a living, breathing advertisement, and if your product doesn't meet the exacting standards, you risk being left on the shelf. The fear of being deemed plain or uncomely wasn't just a slight. It could be a life sentence of reduced opportunities, a path to spinsterhood or a less advantageous union. This constant striving breeds a deep, pervasive anxiety. You are not just being beautiful, you are performing beauty. Every gesture, every tilt of your head, every carefully draped fold of your gown, every inch of your meticulously plucked eyebrow is part of a complex, exhausting choreography. You must project an image that is both pious and alluring, modest yet captivating. Imagine trying to maintain a serene, ethereal expression while your scalp itches furiously from a tightly bound coif, your stomach aches from a restrictive girdle, and your eyes sting from lead-based powder. It's like being perpetually on stage, never truly allowed to relax, to simply be. You can't scratch that itch, you can't slouch, you can't let your true, natural self show, because that self is deemed imperfect, ugly, unworthy. It's enough to make your medieval head spin, isn't it? What happens when you inevitably fail to meet these impossible ideals? And you will fail because they are, by their very nature, unattainable for most. You begin to internalize it. The external judgment becomes an internal voice, whispering that you are not enough, that you are flawed, that you are, in the harshest terms, ugly. This isn't just about vanity. It's about your very identity being chipped away, piece by painful piece. Your self-worth erodes, replaced by a pervasive sense of inadequacy. Then there's the peculiar spiritual dilemma. The Church, in its wisdom, preaches humility, condemning vanity as a cardinal sin. Yet, the very society shaped by that Church demands you adhere to these extreme beauty ideals. You're caught in a spiritual catch-22. Are you sinning by trying to be beautiful, or sinning by not trying to be beautiful enough to secure your future, to fulfill your societal role? This internal conflict, the battle between your soul's salvation and your earthly survival, must have been profoundly unsettling. It's like being told to fly, but also being told that wanting to fly is a sin. While the term body dysmorphia didn't exist in the Middle Ages, the experience of it undoubtedly did. You look at your reflection, and your imperfections are magnified, distorted beyond recognition. A slightly rounded forehead becomes a mountainous ridge. A hint of natural rosiness on your cheeks transforms into a grotesque scarlet fever. Your perfectly normal, healthy body, by modern standards, becomes, in your mind, a grotesque, a deviation from the ideal. This warped perception, fueled by constant societal pressure and self-scrutiny, must have been a living hell. And let's not forget the sheer physical discomfort. The tight lacing of corsets, the burning sensation from harsh depilatories, the constant fear of poisoning from your dangerous cosmetics. These aren't just physical torments. They are constant, tangible reminders of your perceived inadequacy, a self-inflicted penance for daring to be naturally human. Each ache, each sting, each itch reinforces the idea that your natural body is something to be fought against, subdued, transformed. It's like living in a permanent state of low-grade anxiety, where your own body is the battlefield, and you are constantly losing. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval moralistic texts actually linked excessive vanity and an obsession with appearance to various mental afflictions, even suggesting that such sinful preoccupation could lead to physical deformities or a kind of melancholic madness. It was a way of reinforcing piety, but it also inadvertently acknowledged the profound psychological impact of these pressures, albeit through a judgmental lens. The idea was that if you were too focused on the fleeting beauty of the flesh, your soul, and perhaps your mind, would suffer. The pressure to never let your guard down is relentless. Even in what should be the privacy of your own chambers, you might find yourself practicing your modest gaze in a polished surface or perfecting your demure posture for hours. It's exhausting, like being on stage 24/7, with no intermission, no curtain call, just an endless performance for an unseen audience of judgment. You might even find yourself comparing yourself to others, a silent, corrosive competition that leaves everyone feeling inadequate. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of these beauty standards was universally felt across all social strata, or if the lower classes, preoccupied with mere survival, were somewhat immune to such intense pressures. While a peasant woman certainly worried about attracting a good husband, her daily life was likely too consumed with arduous labor and basic sustenance to dedicate hours to plucking her hairline or applying dangerous concoctions. Yet, even within their own communities, basic concepts of attractiveness and social acceptance would have played a role, albeit perhaps less tied to courtly, artificial ideals. Think about the psychological impact of the cures we discussed earlier. Imagine applying a poultice of pigeon droppings and vinegar to your face, hoping for a clearer complexion. Each application is a testament to your desperation, a reinforcing cycle of self-loathing and a desperate, fervent hope for transformation. You are literally smearing yourself with filth, believing it will make you beautiful, all because your natural skin is deemed unacceptable. This isn't just gross. It's deeply demeaning to the self. If you don't meet these standards, the consequences are real and painful. Fewer marriage proposals, less social standing, perhaps even ridicule or pity. Being deemed plain or uncomely wasn't just a fleeting insult. It could be a life sentence of reduced opportunities, a constant reminder of your perceived failings. This social isolation, this sense of being an outcast due to an accident of birth or a resistance to harmful practices, must have been a heavy burden. While medieval people didn't have therapists or diagnoses like anxiety disorder or depression, the symptoms of chronic stress, low self-esteem, and profound sadness stemming from the constant pressure and perceived failure to meet impossible ideals were undoubtedly present. It's a bit like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, only the hole keeps getting smaller, and the peg keeps getting more painful to force. And there was no language, no framework, no understanding to articulate this internal suffering. No one to tell you that it wasn't you who was flawed, but the impossible ideal itself. You were often alone with your anxieties, perhaps turning to prayer, superstition, or simply internalizing the pain. In our modern world, we grapple with the pressures of social media filters and celebrity culture, but at least we have some discourse around body positivity, mental health awareness, and the recognition that beauty standards can be toxic. In the Middle Ages, such concepts were virtually non-existent. You were expected to conform, to suffer, and to hide your pain. The medieval pursuit of beauty wasn't just physically demanding. It was a profound psychological burden, leaving invisible scars on the souls of those who lived under its shadow. It was a constant battle against one's own natural form, a war waged not with swords, but with self-doubt and crushing societal expectation. You've traced the delicate dance of psychological pressure, the quiet anxieties that gnawed at the medieval soul striving for impossible beauty. But now, let's peel back another layer, stepping into the dimly lit, often malodorous, world of medieval medicine, or, rather, the startling lack thereof. Because truly, the brutal and impossible beauty standards weren't just about societal pressure. They were also profoundly, tragically perpetuated by an ignorance so vast, it would make your modern medical textbook weep. You see, their understanding of the human body, of chemistry, of disease, was, to put it mildly, more akin to an elaborate guessing game played with dangerous ingredients than anything you'd recognize as science. Imagine, if you will, a medical landscape where the prevailing theory of health and beauty was the humoral theory. This wasn't some fringe belief. It was the bedrock of all medieval medicine, a mainstream historical fact taught in universities and practiced by every physician worth their salt, or, perhaps, their leeches. You believed your body was governed by 4 essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A perfect balance meant health, vitality, and yes, beauty. An imbalance, however, meant illness, disfigurement, and a whole host of less than ideal aesthetic outcomes. Too much black bile? You'd be melancholic, perhaps with a sallow complexion. Too much blood? You might be ruddy, prone to fevers. And so, to correct these imbalances, and thus, to achieve the desired beauty, you would undergo treatments that now sound utterly barbaric. Bleeding, purging, vomiting, specific diets, hot or cold compresses, all aimed at rebalancing these elusive humors. You might be bled with leeches to reduce a rosy complexion deemed too common, or given a purgative to achieve a coveted pallor, even if it meant weakening you considerably. It was a constant, often debilitating, quest to adjust your internal fluids for external appeal, with literally no understanding of what these fluids actually were, beyond their perceived qualities. It's like trying to fix your car by just randomly pouring different colored liquids into the engine and hoping for the best. What could possibly go wrong? And then, there was the gaping chasm where germ theory should have been. You lived in a world utterly oblivious to bacteria, viruses, or microscopic pathogens. When a medieval person got a skin infection, a festering sore, or a persistent rash, they didn't think of invisible invaders. They thought of bad humors, divine displeasure, or perhaps a witch's curse. This profound ignorance meant that every single beauty practice, from applying creams to removing hair, was a potential gateway for infection. You might use an unsterilized tool to pluck hairs, then rub a concoction of dubious herbs and animal fats into the irritated skin. You might apply a poultice to a blemish, completely unaware that the poultice itself was teeming with microbes. The result? More blemishes, deeper infections, scars, and a vicious cycle of trying to cure the new problem with even more unhygienic methods. It's a bit like trying to clean your kitchen by just smearing all the dirt around with a dirty rag. You're not solving the problem, you're just redecorating the problem with more problem. This lack of understanding also extended to the very ingredients they used. Oh, the medieval apothecary's cabinet. It reads like a list of prohibited substances from a modern health and safety manual. You wanted that ethereal, ghostly white complexion. Remember? Well, you'd likely be reaching for compounds of lead. Ceruse, a white lead pigment, was a common ingredient in face paints and powders. You'd slather it on, day after day, week after week, blissfully unaware that you were slowly but surely poisoning yourself. Lead accumulates in the body, leading to neurological damage, kidney failure, hair loss, and a host of other delightful symptoms. That peaches and cream complexion you were aiming for? It would eventually give way to a sickly gray pallor, sunken eyes, and a host of ailments, which, ironically, would then be treated with more lead-based remedies. Because, hey, it makes you look pale. It's the ultimate beauty trap. The cure becomes the disease, and the disease becomes the new beauty standard. And lead wasn't alone in this toxic parade. Mercury was another popular choice, used to treat skin conditions like acne or syphilis, which, let's be honest, were probably more common than anyone liked to admit. Mercury compounds were also lauded for their skin lightening properties. You'd apply it, perhaps feeling a tingling sensation, unaware that mercury vapor was entering your lungs and the substance was seeping into your bloodstream, causing tremors, memory loss, gum disease, and eventual organ damage. It was the medieval equivalent of using industrial-strength drain cleaner to whiten your teeth, effective in the short term, catastrophic in the long. For those truly committed to a radical transformation, there was always arsenic. Yes, the poison. In small, carefully measured, or more likely wildly guessed doses, arsenic was believed to improve the complexion, giving it a translucent, almost luminous quality. You might ingest it or apply it topically in a paste. The irony, of course, is that chronic arsenic poisoning also causes skin lesions, dark spots, and eventually organ failure. So you might achieve that inner glow just before your organs decided they'd had enough. It's truly a testament to how badly they wanted to be beautiful that they'd risk, well, everything. And let's not forget the eyes. To achieve those wide, dark, alluring pupils that suggested a delicate, almost otherworldly beauty, you might turn to a tropa belladonna or deadly nightshade. You'd apply drops made from this highly toxic plant directly to your eyes. It worked, dilating your pupils beautifully, but it also caused blurred vision, light sensitivity, and could, with prolonged use, lead to blindness. Not to mention the systemic toxicity if too much was absorbed, causing hallucinations, delirium, and even death. It was a case of beauty is pain taken to its most extreme, where the pain included the potential loss of your eyesight. Beyond the overtly toxic, many beauty remedies were simply bizarre, reflecting a mix of folk wisdom, superstition, and a sprinkle of what you might call wishful thinking. This is where you encounter the truly quirky or fringe tidbits of medieval beauty lore. For instance, to remove unwanted hair, beyond the caustic alkalis that could burn your skin, like quicklime mixed with arsenic, a truly terrifying combination, you might be advised to apply a paste made from ant eggs or even bat's blood. Yes, you heard that right. The belief was that the essence of these creatures, with their perceived hairless qualities or flighty nature, would magically transfer to your skin. You'd smear on a mixture, perhaps feeling a shiver of disgust, all while praying it would work, entirely oblivious to the lack of scientific basis. Historians still argue whether these more exotic, animal-based remedies were widely adopted or merely fantastical suggestions in rare manuscripts, but the very fact they were considered speaks volumes about the desperation and the prevailing medical ignorance. You can almost hear the medieval beauty guru whispering, "Just a touch of bat's blood, darling." For that truly unforgettable look, the practitioners themselves were a motley crew. You had your university-trained physicians, steeped in Galen and Hippocrates, interpreting ancient texts through a lens of humoral theory. You had apothecaries mixing concoctions based on often flawed recipes. And then you had the barber surgeons, who might pull your teeth or bleed you dry, often with little understanding of anatomy beyond what they saw when they opened you up. Wise women and local healers also played a role, often with more practical, if sometimes equally dubious, herbal remedies. There was no standardized training, no regulatory body, and certainly no concept of clinical trials. It was a free-for-all of good intentions, bad science, and outright quackery. If someone claimed a remedy would make your teeth whiter, perhaps with a mixture of vinegar and pumice, which would effectively strip your enamel, you might just believe them, because what else did you have? This limited medical knowledge meant that even basic hygiene, which we now understand is foundational to healthy skin and overall well-being, was a minefield. The lack of understanding about the link between cleanliness and disease meant that bathing was often infrequent, and when it did occur, it might be in communal baths that were anything but sanitary. Skin conditions, body odor, and dental problems were rampant, and the cures for them were often worse than the ailments. You might use abrasive powders on your teeth that wore down enamel, or harsh lies to wash your hair that stripped it of its natural oils, leading to scalp issues. Every attempt to enhance your beauty was a gamble, a roll of the dice with your health as the stake. The psychological toll we discussed earlier was compounded by this medical uncertainty. You lived in a constant state of low-grade anxiety, knowing that even your best efforts to look beautiful might backfire, leaving you disfigured or ill. The medieval quest for beauty wasn't just about societal pressure. It was also a perilous journey through a landscape of medical missteps, where every step you took in pursuit of an ideal could lead you deeper into the wilderness of sickness and pain. It makes you appreciate your modern dermatologist, doesn't it? Just imagine trying to explain SPF to someone who thinks their humors are out of whack. And so, As the last whispers of the medieval world fade into the quiet corners of your mind, you might find yourself wondering, are we truly so different? Did all that strange, painful pursuit of perfection simply vanish with the Black Death and the Renaissance? Or do these brutal, impossible beauty standards, like ghostly echoes, still ripple through our modern perceptions, shaping the way we see ourselves and others, often without us even realizing it? Lean in closer now, and let's trace those lingering shadows. While you're certainly not slathering your face with lead paint or plucking your hairline back to your scalp, the underlying desire for certain looks, and the lengths people go to achieve them, carry a surprising medieval resonance. Take, for instance, that coveted pale complexion. In medieval times, it screamed wealth, leisure, and purity. You weren't toiling in the fields under the harsh sun, were you? Today, while we have our tanning trends and sun-kissed looks, there's still an enormous industry built around achieving flawless, even-toned, often lighter skin. Think of the filters that smooth out every pore, the serums promising to erase hyperpigmentation, the fascination with a porcelain finish. You might be aiming for a glow, but often that glow is meticulously crafted to be utterly uniform, a canvas devoid of the sun's natural marks or the blemishes of daily life. Imagine trying to explain a spray tan to a medieval lady or a sunbed session. She'd probably think you'd been cursed by a mischievous imp, or perhaps that you'd willingly subjected yourself to some bizarre form of self-flagellation, rather than an intentional darkening. And yet, the underlying quest for a specific, often unnaturally perfect, skin tone persists. Then there's the elongated face and the obsession with the forehead. While you're thankfully not ripping out your hairline with tweezers or binding your infant's head, the concept of a good forehead or a well-proportioned face hasn't vanished. Look at how makeup artists contour the face to create illusions of length, or how certain hairstyles are chosen to elongate the neck or frame the face in a particular way. There's a subtle, almost unconscious appreciation for a high, clear forehead, often seen as a marker of intelligence or elegance. We might not call it a five-finger forehead anymore, but the ideal of balance and proportion in facial features, however subtly defined by current trends, still holds sway. A medieval courtier might have envied our phone filters, imagining they could finally achieve that perfectly elongated forehead without having to pluck every single eyebrow hair out with tweezers made for pulling splinters. The slender silhouette, that punishing ideal of the elongated torso, also echoes loudly in our modern world. While boned corsets and stomach-flattening girdles might be reserved for special occasions or historical reenactments, the pressure for thinness, for a streamlined physique, is relentless. We swap lead-laced cosmetics for diet pills, arsenic for extreme exercise regimens, and medieval girdles for modern shapewear. The methods have evolved, becoming perhaps less overtly dangerous in some cases, but the underlying message remains: your natural body as it is might not be enough. You must sculpt it, restrict it, push it to conform to an ideal that is often genetically impossible for the vast majority of people. Even hair, which was so often hidden and constrained in medieval times, carries a legacy. While women now flaunt their locks, the emphasis on luxurious, voluminous, and perfectly styled hair as a sign of health, youth, and attractiveness is undeniable. The medieval ideal of hair as a symbol of status, even when covered, translates into our modern obsession with expensive hair treatments, extensions, and complex styling routines. A woman with a thick, shiny mane is often perceived as more vibrant and desirable, a direct descendant of the medieval belief that hair symbolized vitality and fertility. And what about grim hygiene? While we thankfully live in a world of abundant soap, toothpaste, and deodorant, the medieval struggle to appear clean and fresh, despite the reality, has morphed into an almost obsessive quest for absolute cleanliness and absence of natural human scent. Every pore must be purged, every tooth whitened, every hint of body odor masked. We've moved from covering up the bad smells with perfumes to preventing them entirely, but the underlying societal pressure to be clean and fragrant is arguably more intense than ever. The irony, of course, is that achieving this often requires a vast array of chemical products, a far cry from a simple medieval rosewater splash. Perhaps the most potent echo is the idea of pain for perfection. You might swap your medieval lead paint for a fancy jade roller or a painful waxing session. But let's be honest, you're still rolling something on your face or enduring discomfort hoping for magic. From the daily agony of high heels that distort your feet, to the restrictive nature of modern shapewear, to the elective surgeries and injectable fillers that involve needles and recovery time, the adage "beauty is pain" remains chillingly relevant. We've simply updated the instruments of torture. The constant discomfort, the minor aches, the significant financial investment, all are accepted as part of the price of admission to the modern beauty club, much as they were in the medieval one. Then there's the stark reality of class divides. Just as social standing determined access to precious pigments and skilled beauticians in the Middle Ages, wealth continues to dictate access to the pinnacle of modern beauty. High-end skincare, personal trainers, cosmetic procedures, designer clothing, and professional styling are often out of reach for the average person. The natural look so often lauded by celebrities on social media usually requires a team of experts and a significant budget to achieve. The illusion of effortless beauty is, more often than not, a very expensive illusion indeed, creating a new form of privilege that mirrors the old. The mental toll, the psychological scars, also resonate deeply. While we don't have direct medieval diaries detailing body image issues, historians still debate the precise psychological impact of unattainable beauty standards on the average medieval person, much like we grapple with the effects of social media today. The pressure to conform, the feelings of inadequacy, the constant striving for an ideal that is often manufactured and unrealistic. These are burdens that transcend centuries. Social media, with its curated feeds and filtered realities, amplifies these pressures exponentially, creating a constant public performance of self that would have been unimaginable to a medieval peasant. Yet the underlying anxiety of not measuring up feels eerily familiar. Finally, consider the ignorance and illusions, the medical missteps. While we've moved past arsenic and lead, the beauty industry still grapples with questionable ingredients, misleading claims, and the promotion of procedures with potential long-term risks. The constant flow of new miracle products, often lacking robust scientific backing, mirrors the medieval reliance on alchemical concoctions and folk remedies. We're still searching for that magic elixir, that perfect potion that will defy nature and time, often putting our trust in promises that are too good to be true. So, as you drift towards slumber, reflect on this. The medieval world, with all its harshness and strange ideals, isn't as far removed as you might think. The specific expressions of beauty have changed, yes, but the underlying human drives, the desire to be seen as beautiful, to belong, to achieve an ideal, and the willingness to endure discomfort and expense to do so, remain remarkably constant. We've simply traded one set of brutal, impossible standards for another, perhaps more subtly insidious set. The echoes of medieval beauty ideals are all around us, in the magazines, on our screens, and sometimes, even in the quiet, critical whispers we direct at our own reflections. The journey through the strange and often brutal world of medieval beauty has reached its end for tonight. As the last images of elongated foreheads and ghostly pale faces recede, allow your own thoughts to soften, to blur at the edges. You are safe here, nestled in the gentle quiet, far removed from the pressures of lead paint or the confines of a whalebone corset. Let the knowledge of how far we've come, and yet how much remains the same, settle gently into your mind. Feel the comfort of your own bed, the softness of your pillow, a sanctuary from any imposed ideal. The darkness outside holds no judgment, only a deep, profound stillness. Breathe in slowly, letting go of any lingering thoughts, any echoes of the past. The day's history lesson is complete. Your mind is now free to wander into the realms of dreams, where beauty is entirely your own, boundless and free. End of script. Sweet dreams.